work through tomorrow. First and foremost on the agenda is our budget. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about where we are in that process and where we're going. I want to give a little bit of a shout out to Orrin Woodworth and to also the other vice presidents who did an excellent job of putting together what has been a very tight budget. And you can imagine with all of the things that we've been dealing with COVID and HERF funds and some declines in enrollment, we've had to really try to connect some dots, and I think they have done a very good job of that. Our total budget this year is almost $60 million. So we continue to grow. The budget assumes a 4% tuition increase, and that falls within the range of a 3 to 5% increase, which we have been talking about in our strategic plan. There for several years, we were raising tuition 5–6%, but the last 3 years, we've been able to at least start moving in the other direction. My goal would be able to get that down a little bit further, but we just can't do that all at one time. But we're working toward that end, and so we want to be mindful of our students, but we also have to make sure that we have the resources to move forward. We are projecting a total enrollment increase, full-time equivalency increase of 4.1% over last year. Now, keep in mind, last year we were down, so that's not where we need to be related to pre-pandemic levels, but we are on our way back, and that's a good thing. We've got things moving in the right direction. The budget has allowed us this year to invest in some IT infrastructure, and some of you know that we have hired an outside firm called Collegis who's been working with us and helping us along the way. And so we're going to be able to make some additional strategic advances related to infrastructure, IT infrastructure. We will be making several strategic advances, including hiring a few faculty and staff additions that are particularly related to programmatic and accreditation and expansion in programs that we have. Right now, we have budgeted for faculty and staff raises, and so we will, if we continue to meet our enrollment goals, we have every intention of moving forward with that. We're going to spend about $1 million this next year in cash reserves that we have to address some campus maintenance, improvements, and repairs across campus. We have some things related to HVAC, this road that comes in from Conway. We have some things we've got to do there. It's just this whole plan about keeping up with deferred maintenance. We don't want to get behind on that. So we'll be spending about $1 million of our cash reserves to help us accomplish some of those things. The board will approve our faculty reappointments and promotions, and there are also several curricular proposals that the board will vote on as well. We're planning right now to Zoom them in. Many of them travel from different parts of the state. So we've been able to do that before, but we'll be working in that way tomorrow. Just to say a word to you about enrollment, I got to say I'm encouraged of where we are at and where we're going. I got a report last night from the admissions office, and I look at these things pretty closely. I'm really encouraged by our main campus applications and our admitted students to this point. We're running about where we ran in 2019, which were really, really healthy numbers for us. Now, it is still early on in this process, and we have a long way to go. But our admissions staff and our faculty and staff across the board, I know that you all are working hard to help us grow enrollment, and that shows, and that report reflects that. So you should be encouraged by that. Again, we still have a lot to do, but we're moving in the right direction. Our fall to spring retention is solid. It's about 89%, which is a little bit better than an average for us. And this past fall, we had retention of our first-time freshmen year over year was 73%. That was a record for us from freshman to sophomore year, I should say. So again, we want to make sure that we continue to have strong retention numbers. We moved that. Some of you have been around here for a while. 6 or 7 years ago, that number was around 60%. So we have moved that 13 points in a few years, and that is something that we should be proud of. We're not there yet where we need to be, but we're doing a really, really good job. We still have a lot of work to do on our graduate enrollment, but the new MSN, the MSW, and our recent CACREP accreditation for the counseling should help us to begin to make headway in those areas, and I feel strongly about that, and I think we're moving that in the right direction as well. Another encouraging sign is the growing interest in our new accelerated nursing program. The Missouri State Board of Nursing approved MBU for 24 additional students beginning on June 15th of this year. And what I heard yesterday is that we have 9 students who are already enrolled, and we have 8 more that are in the pipeline for that program. And I want to congratulate that team who in about 4 months' time took that idea, got approval, and we are beginning to enroll students in 4 months. That's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that Missouri Baptist University has a history of, and we need to continue doing those kinds of things. I'm excited about that new program. I think it complements our mission well and helps us also fill the need for nurses in this area. A couple of things related to capital improvements. We are going to be doing some fairly minor renovations for the nursing school, and that is to accommodate the accelerated nursing program. It's largely just moving some walls and adjusting classroom sizes at the nursing facility. We're moving forward with our baseball and softball improvements. We should begin construction on some of that this summer. We're still raising resources for that project, but it will include restrooms and a storage area. As you know, we have the porta potties up there, and every semester I get letters from parents about when are we going to have real bathrooms, and so I will be happy when we are able to move forward with some of that. We will include some additional bleacher seating for both baseball and softball, and we will have very modest press box areas as well. So we've got some fundraising that we need to continue to do on that project. We've moved out the modular buildings, and we are going to be turning that space on the corner over here into green space. The Aesthetics and the Hospitality Committee is looking at some future ideas and use of that space. It's not possible for us to put a new building over there because that's where all of our utilities come into campus, and it would cost us several $1 million just to move those. And so that's not in the game plan, but we have some other ideas about what we want to do going forward. Just to give you a quick update on the strategic plan, as you know, the board approved the new strategic plan in late November this past fall. The empowerment team I appointed an empowerment team, and that includes Dr. Melanie Bishop, Dr. Amber Henry, Mr. Bryce Chapman, and Mr. Orrin Woodworth. And that team has been working since last fall to empower individuals in departments to begin to implement all of the strategic plan initiatives that we have, and there are 32 of those. So as a first step, in the last couple of weeks, the team identified champions for each of those 32 initiatives. And the role of the champion is to get the ball rolling, really, and to help identify a game plan and a time frame to accomplish each one of the initiatives that we have outlined. So to that end, the champions began training last week on writing and prioritizing key performance indicators surrounding each one of those initiatives. And when that step has been completed here in the next couple of weeks, we will begin the implementation of the strategic plan later this spring, although there are elements of it that we are already working on, obviously. So at that point, this will include the empowerment team and me and others leading a kickoff event later this spring. You'll hear more about that in the weeks ahead. The KPI champions will begin leading their teams on near-term and short-term action items and next steps. And I want you to remember this is a 5-year plan, so we aren't able to do everything that we need to do at once, but we will need to make significant progress and have measurable goals along the way, and we will do that. I like John Rockefeller's quote, who said, "Those things that are watched improve." And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So there will be assessment points along the way. When I was at the CCCU conference last week with some others from the university, that's the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, one of the sessions that I attended specifically for presidents, we considered and talked about this idea of Christian colleges and universities as the moral compass in a world that is truly lacking some significant moral leadership at this time. And we discussed our role in providing a moral education and really just the priority of developing students with a moral compass that are grounded in a biblical worldview. And really, if you think about it, a moral compass is an internalized set of values that guide a person or an organization in judging between right and wrong and then acting accordingly. It's really a foundation for virtuous leadership, for sound moral decision-making, and for us, it's our belief system, which is anchored in a biblical worldview. However, it was really interesting as our conversation went on, we talked about things like moral clarity and moral courage as well. And when we talked about moral clarity, we said, well, what is that really? It's taking the belief system that we have, think about our mission statement, and it's knowing the direction that we want to go as a Christian institution. But you know, when you think about that, that's really the easy part. Moral courage is different, and it takes a step further than moral clarity. It's the time when we take action. It's the decisions that we make as an institution, and it's really where the rubber meets the road. So what are just a few examples of moral courage at MBU? Well, I think one of the things that it is, it's our hiring for missional fit and by standing by those values. Moral courage means saying who we are publicly and what we stand for. It's what we communicate on our website, through social media, the MBU magazine. It's what we say to prospective students, like at Spartan Preview Day and their parents. It's what faculty write in publications. It's what we teach our students every day. And it's boldly affirming our religious freedom and the sanctity of life. It means telling our gospel-centered story and investing in students in a way that reflects this big and broad commitment. But moral courage is more than learning that just gathers facts and amasses information and cultivates students to have marketable skills. Those are all things that are important, but lots of schools do those things. But our campus, this university, is a place to shape the lives of our students, to be more deliberate about the formation of their moral compass and their character. But moral courage means tending to MBU's biblical heritage, and this does require for us to have careful attention and consistent stewardship of that. But here's the deal. If we are truly to be morally courageous, we should not be surprised when the world takes a few shots at us. If they're not, we may not be proclaiming what we stand for clearly enough. I also believe that moral courage reflects us being humble and hospitable in the face of adversity and what others are saying. Moral courage promotes and it practices a culture of civil discourse. And I believe, personally, that one of the greatest opportunities of Christian higher education, and specifically Missouri Baptist University, is for us to model for our students what it looks like to disagree with someone and yet still love and care for them the same way that Jesus would. Barry Corey, who is the president of Biola University, wrote a book called Love Kindness, and he talks about this idea of a solid center and soft edges. He talks about being a receivable people. I hope that Missouri Baptist University can be a place of solid center where we don't capitulate on our principles, but also a place of soft edges. But here at MBU, through our teaching, learning, and embracing life together, we bear witness to the living example of Jesus Christ, the one who lovingly, obediently, and courageously extended his saving grace, and not even one of us deserves any of it. I'm grateful that MBU is a moral compass in this region, and that our true north is the authority of Scripture. Moral courage is a rare thing these days, and it is my privilege to stand with all of you in this high calling of Christian education. I hope you have a great day today.
Thank you for those words of encouragement, President Ross. I want to introduce someone who is no stranger to this campus. Dennis Scanio began working at MBU in 2011 and right away became one of the treasures of this school. He's one of those guys that when I am around him, I leave conversations and encounters encouraged. I talked to John Shaw, our acting director of campus operations, and I just asked him, so what is Dennis known for in the campus operations area? And here's what John said, 3 things that are great. First, he said that Dennis is always a positive influence on our department. And then he said, I wish I had 12 Dennis Scanios. And this third one's just great. I spent some time reflecting on this. He said that Dennis reflects Christ without judgment in his work and his interactions with others. Dennis agreed to bring our devotion today, and in line with his calling, he's going to talk about some tools that we use for service. And I want you to know that I'm very excited when he asked me, hey, do you think it'd be okay if I brought some tools to show? And I'm like, yeah, awesome, do that. So I walked in this morning, and the first thing I saw was a plunger on that table behind me. So I have no idea where the next 15 minutes are going. But would you welcome Dennis Scanio?
This will make sense, I think. All right. Okay, I have a script. Oh, and I have a slideshow, too. Whew. All right. All right, good morning. I was told by Bull to, let's see, 2 things, right? Keep it short and keep it interesting. So my goal is to keep him awake. And I'm looking for smiling faces, too. So I see a lot of good smiling faces, people I know. That's good. Okay, so how I got here. First of all, it was we get work orders. This is a stack of work orders. This is just from the fire marshal. We got a lot of stuff to fix, and so we whittle down these things. So I got an imaginary work order from Andy Chambers to be here to speak. So I'm fulfilling that work order, and we can toss that away. So, yes. Okay, so like Andy said, I started working here in 2011 because I know John Shaw, and I've known him for a long time. And also my wife and I prayed. This is a second kind of career for me. My wife and I prayed for some sort of physical work because I like fixing things, and also to be able to do artwork part-time because my education and my former career was doing art stuff. So I got both. So I got full-time work here, keeps me physical, gets me fixing stuff, and I get to do artwork at church, graphic design stuff for our church. So that prayer was answered. Okay, so that's how I got here. And plus, too, I asked Carol, all right, Andy asked me if I could do this thing, speak in front of all y'all. And she said, well, why don't you give it a try? And so she's how I got here. So anyway, right now I think she's praying for me, which is good. All right, moving on. How I got here. That's my mom and dad. Well, actually, that's my mom on the right, and my dad is on the far left. He was in World War II, and so those are some of his buddies from World War II. I think he got over there, I think he said 5 days after D-Day, so he landed there, and he was under Patton, and so I think he was the Army of Occupation in Germany as a youngster. I guess maybe in that picture he might have been 20, oh yeah, okay. And so my heritage is Italian. So my dad's family came from Italy in about 1915. So I got an Italian heritage. I don't think my grandma or grandpa spoke English. Somehow they came over to New York, and then they settled in St. Louis. And then my mom, that's my mom's high school graduation picture. And so I've got a Italian-Scottish heritage. So anyway, I had to show you. Andy saw my tartan tie. This is a Buchanan tartan tie. My mom's maiden name was Buchanan, her first name. She's Billie Jane Buchanan. She's passed away now. Both my mom and dad have passed away. But I wanted to say that my mom was, it's kind of like Lois and Eunice, Timothy, right? His mother and grandmother were influential in his spiritual life. So my mom, I guess, was my Lois, I guess. I want to talk about my siblings a little bit. I've got 2 brothers and 1 sister. My younger brother, Jack, graduated from here, got a teaching degree, taught many, many years, and also played baseball here. And he actually played softball on the same team with Dr. Ross at church a while back. So anyway, moving along. Let's see. This is my wife, Carol, a long time ago. This is a picture of us in our 20s. What? What? Don't I look cool? Yeah. Yeah, that looks 80s, doesn't it? Yeah, I look like a heavy, don't I? Anyway, we met at Bible Study Fellowship for singles, and we were in our 20s. And okay, this was one of the points I was wanting to make. When I talk about Carol, she's my best friend, my encourager. She helped me out with a lot with the script and all that stuff, and helped me out with what to talk about and encouraging me to be myself. Hopefully this is me. Anyway, I wanted to say, she's also my partner in the gospel. We she's a children's ministry and nursery director at church. And anybody who's dealt with that knows what that involves. She's under, well, not too much stress, but anyway, it's a lot. So I wanted to say that, so we met when we were in our 20s, and after a 2-week engagement, we were married 25 years later. And that's a lot to explain, but I don't have time. In the meantime, as a single, Carol adopted our daughters, Abigail and Libby. And there they are, and she adopted them as they were little bambinos. I think Abigail was 4 months old, or 4 or 5 or 6, and then Libby, I think, was 9 months old when Carol went to get her. They come from different parts of China. That was what the Chinese had the one-child deal going on, and so they were in orphanages. Somehow Carol got up the courage to go get them. She doesn't like flying, so she flew all the way around the world to pick up these 2 little girls. Not at the same time, they're 4 years apart. But now, Carol doesn't really want to go past Manchester Road. So, anyway, really just to get her. I'm her driver, so I don't mind driving. I like driving. So anyway, I want to say Carol did all the hard work in raising the girls. And then, next slide. Okay. So we were married in 2011. So we had been friends all these years, Carol and I. And so I'd seen the girls grow up. And so I knew kind of what they were like, and I was kind of around them, being friends and all that. And eventually, Carol fell in love with me, I think. And we got married in 2011. I've got the tartan tie on. And so this is the day that I was officially adopted by them. Not really. Anyway, I adopted. This is our official adoption day. So the girls took on my name. Their mom's name was Wells. My name is Scanio, obviously, and so they moved up a little bit in the alphabet. Abigail has such a tender heart. Some of you know Abigail, because both the girls go here. Abigail, tender heart. She's a really good artist and a good photographer. And then Libby is funny. She cracks me up. She's hilarious. A very hard worker. Another talented girl, and she's going to be graduating here in May as a ministry student, ministry, whatever that is. What is that? Christian ministry. That's it. Thanks, Matt. Thank you. A degree in Christian ministry. Whew. Thank you, Matt. Okay, so they adopted me at that time, and so I kind of fit into the family. Okay, the next deal is the guy on the left is Matt Williams, and Matt and Abigail graduated in 2018 in May and got married. They went together here and fell in love and got engaged, and they got married in June of 2018. And so we added Matt to the family. Oddly enough, I met Matt before Abigail did here at the school. So I got to know him and keep an eye on him. So I figured he was a pretty good guy, so it worked out. He actually asked me if he could marry Abigail, so that was kind of cool. He's a super talented guy. I think he was, you guys know, yeah. And so quite a good addition to the family. Weirdly enough, when I met him, he was kind of, his first year, he kind of looked like Clark Kent. You know, his glasses and a short haircut and clean-cut guy. And in the field building, I said, this guy doesn't look familiar, so I'm going to go talk to him. And I said, hey, what's your name? And he says, Matt Williams. And I said, I should be able to remember that because my nephew's name is Matt Williams. My sister married a Williams. So now, anyway, Abigail married a Williams. So we have Williamses all over the place. Okay, and then we have our first grandson. This guy popped out January 1st of last year. His name is August Finn Williams. So he was born January 1st last year. Carol babysits him on Thursday, so I get to see him at least once a week. And then so I got a couple of pictures. So there he is. There he is with the pacifier and without. He's a funny kid. Okay. All right. Moving on. This is what I'm going to talk about. And you guys can participate. Okay? Are you ready? All right. I'm going to go. Okay. So these are some handy service tools. I thought, I was talking to Andy. Can I bring in some props? So here's my props. And so here are the tools. There they are. That's just a picture of all of them together. Okay, we'll go through these individually, okay? The first one is a Gerber multi-tool. Let's get a look at that thing. It looks kind of scary, doesn't it? We use this thing all the time. I do, because it's so handy. Actually, this is a broken one. I got a new one. This is a new one. So this is my favorite. This one sticks with me. It does. This one sticks with me all the time. Okay, so moving along. Next one is the corky flapper. Have you guys ever looked inside your toilet tank? Huh? Have you? We recommend, right, Bull and John? We recommend the red corky flapper. If you want to replace one, we do, really, seriously, we recommend this. Really. Okay. Thank you, Tom. All right. This is a basic plunger. Don't be scared. This one is labeled sinks only. This one's still clean. And this was Bull's idea. He said, we got to keep one for sinks only. So I wrote sinks only on there. You guys know what that's for. Okay, next one is, wait a second, what happened? Did I go too far? No? I got them backwards. The next one is a level. Okay, if we've come into your office and hung stuff up, we use a level to keep it straight. You guys know what that's all about. And wait a second, here it is. This is a small one. That's pretty handy. It's also magnetized. And a tape measure, okay. You know what that's about too. This is DeWalt. We use DeWalt stuff. We recommend DeWalt stuff. Okay, all right. Here is, okay. All right, this is audience participation. Are you all ready? Am I ready? I don't know. All right, so the job is to match the Bible verse with the tool. All right, I'm gonna give you some time, hopefully, without freaking out too much. All right, I'm gonna read the verse. Okay, look at those tools. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every work. Anybody got it? Gerber tool, multi-tool? Those are good guesses. They will come up. All right. It's the level. All right, and I'll explain why. Okay, like Keith was saying, the Bible is our standard. So the Bible is like a level, and we use it to keep things straight, all right? I was thinking if it wasn't for a level used on these floors and these walls, this building would collapse, okay? It's similar to the Bible. If we don't stick with the Bible, our faith is going to collapse. Let's see. Okay. And, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Okay. Lean not on your own understanding. With this thing, we can tell if something's leaning, like when we hang up a picture in an office. We can tell if it's leaning using this. So this is the standard. The Bible is the standard. And I was going to say, is it getting late? Am I running out of time? There was a point in my life when I didn't trust that the Bible was true. And so I had difficulty with good portions of it, all right, until I began to read it myself. And then once I read it and understood it, then it actually brought me to faith in Christ. And now my faith is more solid. It's not perfect, but it's solid because of what I know about the Bible. So I recommend. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Carol and I met at Bible Study Fellowship. That was a big deal in my growth and understanding of the faith, okay? All right, next one. I think this is the next one. Okay, all right. You know it. As it is, there are many parts but one body. Okay, this one's a little easier. What do you think? I hear multi-tool, and you're right. Okay, there it is. Actually, I broke this multi-tool because I wasn't using one of the tools right. I tried to use the knife as a wedge and snapped it off. So there's a moral there somewhere. Okay, I need to tell this. We work together. We work in the maintenance team, and we do a good job because we work together. And so we got housekeeping, we got grounds, we got maintenance, and we got nursing, and we got coaches, and we got education, and we got music, we got drama. Okay, so we are a team. And some years ago, I was asked to try to maintain the vans. And I wasn't good at it, okay? It really didn't make sense for me to do the vans, you know, like all this stuff you gotta do to fix them. You gotta check the oil and I don't know, check the everything. So that was definitely not a job for me, and it was a natural fit for Bull. It's not a fit for me. The guy knows what he's doing when it comes to cars. And I was gonna say, I'd rather paint an office, which I kind of like doing, than work on the vans. And I couldn't teach biology. I can't coach basketball. I saw Samuel come in somewhere. And you may or may not paint an office so well, but together we make Mobap work. And as Christians, we're part of God's multi-tool, right? So, all right, next one. Bull, are you still awake? Got his hand up, good. Okay. Yeah. Oh, go quickly. Therefore, encourage one another. Next one, okay. Encourage one another and build one another up just as you're doing. What do you think it is? All right, sorry, it's the flapper. Okay. Sorry. Okay, I wrote that encouraging words are like fresh water. Really. Just like the flapper is a little thing, words can make a big life change, okay? I just want to say, when I was in grade school, I was encouraged by my grade school art teacher to be that I was good in art. And that encouragement kept me going. Did art in high school and college, got a job in art. And so being encouraged, you guys know this, we all need encouragement. We all need encouragement. And I was just going to say, look for opportunities to encourage others. It can be pretty simple. Just say hi. Just wave, listen to what they have to say. Okay, Bull, was that better? Thumbs up? Okay, this one, okay. Oh Lord, make me know the end and what's the measure of my days, let me know how fleeting I am. Pretty easy, tape measure, yes. Okay, flashback to Carol and our picture. We were in our 20s, now we're not, okay. The girls were babies, now they're not. And I was just going to say our life goes by pretty quick, okay? So we can only do so much. Our time on earth is only so long. Let's see, on our stack of work orders, these work orders are going to end up going in the trash when we're done, all right? But relationships we make here or at home or whatever, whoever we interact with, last a lot longer than work orders that get tossed out. Okay. This is the toughest one. And you can guess what it is. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. All right, you guys know it is. It's the plunger. You can save the best for last. Not really. We had to get to this one. Okay, we live in a fallen world. We sure do. Toilets clog, lights burn out, holes get punched in the walls, especially at PH. And so there's a lot to complain about. How much time? Am I running out of time? It's getting late. I could skip that part. I was going to tell a story about how I got angry about something that I had to put up with. All right, where's Amber? Where's Amber Henry? All right. A couple of weeks ago, when I was exposed to a coworker with COVID, and I got a call on Sunday morning from John. He said, "You got to talk to Amber Henry because you're not going to be able to come into work for a while." I was steamed, and I called Amber, and I said, "I'm perfectly healthy. I've been exposed to COVID already. If there's anything, I'm going to complain." Amber, I said, "This is a crock," didn't I? I think I did. I didn't want to stay home. I didn't want to use up my sick days for something when I wasn't sick. But you were right, because that was our policy, so I stayed home. And I got some things done at home. All right? I painted some trim, the baseboard trim of our house. I fixed my mother-in-law's porch light. It was beautiful weather. So in hindsight, the verse, you guys know the verse, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So I forgot about that until afterwards. So when I'm grumbling or complaining, or when we are, if we can go with all things work together for good, it'll help. Okay, last one. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive an inheritance. You are serving Christ, the Lord Christ. All right, this is kind of a trick question. It's all of them, okay? So we work together. We encourage one another. We, I guess, anticipate that there's going to be problems. There's going to be stuff to complain about, but realize that God is good. The Bible is our level, so we know what we should be serving, what we should be serving about and how to do it. And then the tape measure, we can only do so much, okay? So that's kind of a review. That's my last. So the question is, are we ready to serve today? I think we are. I think we are. So there's a lot of projects to do. And however, there's one extra credit question. All right, one more tool. And they all ate and were satisfied. All right, the answer is, I'm not going to force this one on you. It's a trick question, okay? All right. And don't you hate it when teachers, or isn't it sad when a question shows up on the test that wasn't covered in the lecture? That's it. Anyway, that's it. I'm finished.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much, Dennis. That was fantastic. Miss Ashley Johnson's going to come and present our Campus Staff Award.
Good morning. I have the great honor of presenting our 2022 Outstanding Employee of the Year Award today. This award was established by the happy and retired Ken Revenaugh. And when I emailed Ken about the criteria for this award, he sent me a 7-paragraph email in response. And for those of you who've worked with Ken, you know what I'm talking about. But, Ken's legacy lives on here at MBU. He believes in our students, but also in the employees who serve them. This award is to formally celebrate one outstanding employee, and as you all know, we have many. It's to recognize their hard work and efforts, but also to award them with a monetary gift from an endowment that was created by Ken. And today I'm happy to announce that it has grown and the earnings have allowed us to award a $600 gift today. I also want to mention that the business office, especially Zach Greenlee and Lori Wallace, helped with the nominations and coordination of this year's award. When you look at this employee, you will always find a smile on her face. She embodies Colossians 3:23, work as though you are working for the Lord. She also personifies the core values of MBU, striving for excellence in her work. She is serious and intentional about her Christian faith. She freely and responsibly searches for truth. She believes in the importance of and the cultivation of character, not just in our students, but for herself and for her family as well. And she believes in social change through service and leadership. One of her nominators said this of her: "This longtime employee of MBU works diligently behind the scenes to make the student experience exceptional for all students. This employee always gives 110% to her work, but especially went above and beyond during COVID while serving on the contact tracing team. The past 2 years, she put forth much more than could be asked of an employee, and she did so with a smile on her face and compassion for others." This year's Outstanding Employee of the Year award goes to Krista Hughes.
I just want to say thank you very much. This is an honor, and I'm really shocked and surprised, so thank you all.
Oh, that's me. All right. We are in good shape on time. We're going to have a break at this time, and we will be back. It's supposed to be 9:30, but I'm feeling generous. We'll come back at 9:35. 10 minutes. Let's find our seats. Yeah. We are privileged this morning to hear from one of the attorneys who has worked with Missouri Baptist University for many years, providing us with professional, compassionate counsel through a number of just student needs through the years. Her name is Betsy Mooney, and we have 2 sessions this morning on Title IX and diversity training. They are about compliance to make sure that we are doing the training that is required. But when I think about it, and I've wrestled and dealt with this for many, many years in my work, the law of God is so much higher than the human expression of it. Though the human expression of the law of God is uniquely contextualized to the needs of the situations that we find ourselves in. But when I think about the importance of not discriminating and the beauty, the tapestry of God's diverse family, I think about the book of Revelation and how when we see God's people gathered around the throne, he has chosen and raised up people from every tribe, every nation, every tongue, that our uniqueness, our difference as image bearers is part of the glory of Christ on that day. And that causes us to treat each other, as persons of inestimable worth, and to prize each other as creatures made in God's image and redeemed by Christ, and to treat each other with the kind of respect and honor that Christ expects of us and how he treats us. And so Betsy will help us think through the law, and while we do it, we also think through our accountability to an even higher law. And so we're grateful for you coming over and working with us. So would you welcome Betsy Mooney?
Good morning. It is wonderful to be back here at Missouri Baptist. I was just telling Kim Gray that I think the last time I was here, I presented on FERPA, so student privacy. The good news for you is that today's topics are way more interesting than FERPA, which is, it's a low bar, but you know, what are you gonna do? So first, we're going to talk about Title IX. And I know for a lot of people, when you hear the phrase Title IX, the first thing that comes to your head is, oh, sports, women's sports, that's what we're going to talk about. That is not what we're going to talk about today. Title IX actually has a much bigger umbrella than that. Title IX is really about sex discrimination. And really, for our purposes today, we're going to talk about sexual harassment. And you're also probably thinking, oh, sexual harassment, I know about that. You go to the training, you know, don't tell lewd jokes in the workplace, don't touch your coworker inappropriately. This is different. This is a very specific definition of sexual harassment that applies only to colleges and universities and schools. And that is something that we want you to be aware of, the nuances of that particular definition and how it applies to your students, how it applies to all of you, and how you can be prepared if something comes along that you need to address. So my goals for you today are really twofold. I want to help you keep your students safe. And that, to me, is the number one goal. That's why you're all here. You're here to educate them and keep them safe and well and healthy. So that is the overarching goal. The second goal, and this is really kind of more of my goal, is to keep the university and you out of hot water. Because as boring as it is to sit in an auditorium and listen to an attorney talk for 2 hours on a Wednesday morning, it is way more boring to have to sit with an attorney preparing you for a deposition. So, right, Dr. Chambers? So I'm trying to keep you out of that hot water and show you the way, basically. And I will also say that I have found, and I say this with love, because my mother is a teacher, that teachers make the worst deponents ever. So we really don't want you to get deposed. You want to educate, you want to help. When you're in a deposition, you don't want to help the other side at all. So if we can keep you out of that deposition, that's going to be better for you, it's going to be better for the university, and most importantly, it's going to be better for the students. So To start, I want to talk about the ways that this might come across your desk, the ways that you might encounter a Title IX situation. So the first type situation is that a student can report to you that they have been a victim of sexual harassment or sex discrimination or sexual assault. That's the most obvious way you can have a student come to you and tell you, I need to talk to you about this. We want you to know what to do when that happens. The second way can be if you are asked by a student to be an advisor as part of a sexual harassment hearing. If there's an alleged violation of our policy, then you can be asked to be an advisor and help that student, support that student. We want you to understand what that role looks like so that you know what you're getting into if you're asked. And we also want you to know what the expectations for you will be, and if you find yourself in that position. And the third way that you could be involved is if you are tasked with being a decision maker in one of these hearings, and we want you to know what that's going to look like. Again, this is just going to be a very high-level view of all of this. You would be trained more specifically for any of these, but we want you to just be aware of the general universe. And so that's what we're here for today. So you can go to the next slide. So the question is, why are we here? What's new? Haven't we always had a policy that kept people from discriminating against each other on the basis of sex or sexually harassing each other? And the answer is yes. But our federal government, a few years ago, decided that they were going to revise the guidance that was in place for sexual discrimination and sexual harassment in Title IX. Before that, there had not really been any regulations in place. It was kind of all loosey-goosey and governed by like a Dear Colleague letter that was put out by the Department of Education, and so there wasn't a lot of guidance. They decided that they wanted to give some guidance and put those specific procedures in place. And so that is in part why we're here. And again, the other two reasons why we are here is to keep the students safe and keep you out of trouble. I'm going to keep coming back to that because I want to keep you focused on what the real, most important things are today. So Title IX and its regulations, it's kind of been a sea change with how they have handled these new regulations. They look very different than what was required before. There are a lot of new requirements. There are differences in when it applies. Before, it was much more overarching. Now it's much more narrowly tailored. And then now the requirements for reporting are much more detailed. And who does what when it's reported to them is also much more detailed. So we felt like it was important to bring you up to speed on what these new changes are because it looks different than what you have known in the past. And we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. So you can go to the next slide. And actually, I had talked about that, so you can go to the next slide now. And we talked about the goals. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the policy. We're going to go through the Missouri Baptist policy, which I helped to write with Dr. Lyon. So if you have questions at any time, Dr. Lyon is a great resource for that, and I would encourage you to reach out to him because he helped write the policy, so he is very knowledgeable about what it includes. We'll include the scope of the policy, which, as we said, has changed since what we used to have in place before. And then finally, we'll talk about the process that's in place for the investigations, the hearings, and then the appeals that are in place for students. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about background about what Title IX is. Then we're going to talk about some recent changes in the regulations, as I mentioned. We'll do an overview, we'll do the scope, and then we're going to just kind of go through all the little details. And again, I will apologize because this presentation, I feel like, is more nuts and bolts, but unfortunately, there's kind of no other way to get through it. So I'm going to try to avoid just reading the slides and give you some stories along the way that I think illuminate what the slides say, but I will apologize in advance because it's a lot of material to get through. Next slide, please. And the next one. So as I said before, Title IX, not just about sports, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex with respect to accessing a college, university, educational program or activity. And so that's what we're talking about. This is only sex discrimination. We're not talking about race discrimination. We're not talking about disability, age discrimination. That's all in a separate category. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've had this whole new sea change with respect to the regulations. The Trump administration put these new regulations in place in the middle of a pandemic, so that was really fun. They withdrew the Dear Colleague letter, then they released the proposed regulations, they had comment on it, and then they released the final regulations, and there was really not a lot of time in place to change the policies of all these institutions. And of course, that hit during the pandemic summer when everything was shut down. And so my thanks go out to the staff here for working with us so closely over Zoom for months to try to get this policy in place in just an incredibly difficult situation, as you know. So next slide, please. So this is what the regulations require now, and this is just some highlights of some new things that are in place. So obviously, this is not new. Schools have to not be deliberately indifferent when they become aware that there has been an incident of sexual harassment. Obviously, that's kind of what was already in place before, so that's not really new. Sexual harassment has a new definition. It's very specific. It's in the regulations, and that is the only definition of sexual harassment that matters for purposes of Title IX. That's not the only definition of sexual harassment that matters for the purposes of the university, but for what we're talking about today, that's the limit. Next, the university has to offer supportive measures, and these are things like changing class times, no contact orders. And the interesting thing is that these have to be put in place for both the complainant, who's the person who's alleging the violation of the policy, and the respondent, who is the person who has been accused. That is somewhat new. Some institutions did that anyway, but now it is required, and that is kind of it's indicative of what they have done with these new regulations because they wanted them to be more balanced. Before the regulation or the procedures that were in place were more focused on the victim. Now they're more focused on both of them. So it's what do we do for the respondent? What do we do for the complainant? That is relatively controversial, as you might imagine, but that is what is in place right now. It will be interesting to see with our new administration whether they want to make changes to this again, which means we get to revise the policy again, which means I get to come back and talk to you again. Sorry about that. It is on their radar, I will say, but I also will say that they have kind of indicated that enforcement of the minutia of this set of regulations is not high on their priority list. They're focusing on other things. And so I don't know how quickly something like that would come because it is an extremely arduous process to revise regulations. And so now that they're in place, we're probably going to have to live with them for a while. But it will be interesting to see because that is something that was addressed when they came into office, that it was something that they were looking at. So there might be some alterations. I don't think it will be a big change like it was before. So one of the other things that is required is you have to have a signed formal complaint. And the formal complaint is kind of that's the catalyst that starts the official process. Before that, it's all, we do supportive measures, we try to make things better, but the formal complaint is what sets the process in motion, and that process is very specific. And so it has to be in writing, it has to be signed, it's very detailed and official. So there's no question as to whether a formal complaint has been filed. And then finally, one of the other regulations is that those formal complaints must be dismissed if certain factors are in place. That's new. They have some that are discretionary ways that it can be dismissed, but sometimes it has to be dismissed. You don't have any discretion. It cannot be a formal complaint under Title IX, and that is new and different. So next slide, please. So they also, and this is kind of the meat of the regulations, they have very specific requirements for the grievance process that is put in place. So the decision maker, and this was new, and this is tough for small institutions. The decision maker has to be separate from the investigator. Back in the good old days, Dr. Chambers, sometimes because he was serving in that role, he would do the investigation and then he would make the decision. That can't happen anymore. You have to have someone wearing different hats because they want them to be siloed in different parts of the investigation. And so you have an investigator, and then you have the decision maker, and then you have the Title IX coordinator, and they all have to be different people. And that's really, really hard when you're a smaller school, because we know you're already doing more than you have time to do. So finding people who can add yet another job to their list is hard. And also for a smaller school, you don't need a full-time investigator on staff. You have regular issues, but you don't have them every week, although sometimes it probably feels like they call me every week. But you don't have it that often. So you need somebody who can kind of do it on the side. That's very challenging. Then the biggest change, and this is probably the most controversial of any of the changes to the regulations, is now that if you have a formal complaint and someone says, I want to go forward with this process, you have to have a live hearing. That is new. You have cross-examination during these hearings. It's like a little mini trial, which is very daunting for students in particular. And that is daunting for students who are thinking about filing a formal complaint, knowing that this is not just going to be a conversation in Dr. Lyon's office. This is going to be like a little trial. And that is kind of alarming. And that has been one of the most controversial parts of this new set of regulations. So next slide, please. So, of course, as we always do, we follow the law here at Missouri Baptist. And so we put this new policy in place, and it contains all the pieces that it has to have. You can go to the next slide. The Title IX coordinator for Missouri Baptist is lucky Dr. Lyon. He's like the king of Title IX here, much to his dismay, I'm sure. So as I said, he's the one that you're going to want to go to if you have questions. He's also the primary person that we hope that our students go to if they have questions, if they have concerns, if they've seen something, if they've experienced something. So if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation with a student, then that is who I would recommend top of the list to go talk to, because he's been heavily trained, unfortunately for him, and he knows exactly what he's supposed to do, and he's got all his ducks in a row. So that is where I would send students. If you don't know how to help them, send them to Dr. Lyon. So next slide, and then the next slide. So this is, when I talked about everything that is sexual harassment is not going to come within the umbrella of this policy. This is one area where things start to fall out. And this is all pursuant to those new regulations. So the scope of the policy, it only pertains to conduct that occurs on campus or property that is owned or operated by the university, or if it occurs in the context of a university employment or education program or activity within the United States. So that's pretty specific. It has to be here on campus. It has to be part of a university program. So let's see, what if it was study abroad? Does that fall within this policy? It doesn't. It does not fall within this policy. So if you have a sexual assault that occurs off campus or in Europe, even if it's part of a study abroad program, it has to be within the United States, and so it does not apply. If you have a sexual assault that occurs in an apartment complex that's off campus, unless it is tied to a university program, then it's not necessarily going to fall within the scope of this policy. And so I think you talk about residence halls, parking lots, concerts that are sponsored by the school, classrooms. These are all places that are going to be covered. But if you have, again, study abroad, parties off campus, apartments off campus, and there's not a connection to the school or employment or education activities, it may not fall within this policy. So next slide, please. What is an education program or activity? It's relatively broad. It's the locations, the events, or the circumstances over which the university exercises substantial control over both the respondent and the context in which the harassment occurs. So you've got any building that's owned by the university, as I said, classrooms, dorms, again, parking lots. Parking lots, a lot of stuff happens in parking lots. And so those are all the types of places that this is going to apply. Now you're saying to yourself, so you're telling me that if somebody gets sexually assaulted on a study abroad program that's sponsored by the university or in an apartment off campus, that we can't do anything about it? Of course you can. but it doesn't fall within this policy. So if it doesn't fall within this policy, then we just use a different policy. So the university now gets to have 2 policies, which is extremely confusing and is another criticism of these regulations, because before it could all be together. Now this carves out a very specific component, and that everything else goes into something else. So if you're looking on the website, let's say you have a student who comes to you and says, I think I've been sexually assaulted, or I know I've been sexually assaulted. I want to report it to the university. And you get some details from them, and they say, you know, I was raped by a boy that I know in my apartment after a party. And you say, okay, let's sit down and take a look at this. Which pot is this going to fit in? And basically, that most likely is going to fit in that other policy. So it's important to get some guidance. Again, Dr. Lyon is a great resource when you're facing an issue like that, so you know you're sending them down the right path, because the policies are similar, but they are not identical. For instance, the policy that would deal with off-campus, non-related to the university issues does not require that little mini trial. So that's a big difference. And you want to make sure that you're sending them down the right path so you can give them the right information, and they know where to go and who to talk to and what that process is going to look like, so they can make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to go forward. So next slide, please. So as I said, if you don't have it fall within the Title IX policy, there are other places to go, which is great. If you have a student situation, that complaint is going to be handled through the student handbook and the student process. If you have an employee situation, that will be handled through the personnel handbook. So those are 2 other divergent paths that you're going to come across. So just think about, like, we have to give it some thought, seek some guidance, and think about which pot it's going to fall into. So next slide. So here's a hypothetical for you. And I will tell you that one of the best things about being an attorney is that our hypotheticals actually have no real answer, because we don't make the decisions for you. We tell you what the guardrails are, and you stay within those guardrails. We tell you what the risks are. We tell you what the possible benefits can be. But you in this room are the people who have to make the decision. That's the greatest part about being an attorney. I don't have to make the decisions. I just get to tell you what the lay of the land is. So with these hypotheticals, I'm not going to come to a conclusion on most of them. It's going to be just a thought process of how you would issue spot if this comes across your desk, and what you're going to think about. So here's the hypothetical. We have a freshman student athlete who reports after drinking in his residence hall, he attended a party at an off-campus apartment hosted by upperclassmen who are teammates. This sounds very familiar, doesn't it? This happens like every weekend. He reports he was given several drinks at the party and has few memories after the first hour. He reports that he woke up on the couch of his apartment and found that, ta-da, he's not wearing any pants. I mean, doesn't that happen to all of us every weekend? And it's amazing how much that happens to college students, though. So he reports that there was another individual on the couch who was also not wearing pants. And he reports that he returned to his residence hall and then called the RA later that day. So let's think about this. Where did the conduct occur? That's a problem. So he was in his residence hall drinking, which is not great, but he's drinking in his residence hall, but then he leaves and he goes to a party off campus. So now we're taking it off campus. Is this part of a university program? Was it a university party off campus? Was it, a party for the lacrosse team? Doesn't sound like it, but that's a question that we would ask. Did the school have control over his conduct or the conduct of the people around him? And the answer is, that's a question that we need to ask. So these are the things that you're going to want to think about when a student comes to you with an issue. Where did it happen? What were the circumstances under which it happened? Who was there? Who else knows about this? Because sometimes you're going to get, actually all the time, you're going to get 2 different, 3 different stories. So it's helpful, the more people that you can talk to corroborate, the better off you are. So just think about these things. If a student comes to you, you're not responsible for doing the investigation, but those are thoughts to have in your head. And those are the thoughts that the investigators who do the investigation will have in their heads as they look at a particular issue, and we decide which path to send it down. Next slide, please. And then move ahead. All right, so this is part, I am not going to read these for you. You can read. I know, I'm fairly confident of that. So take a look at these. Really, sexual harassment, it's very similar to what you've heard of before, but again, within these specific situations. And so the next slide, I'm also not going to read for you. You can go ahead to the next one. Sexual assault, I'm not going to read this. But again, you get the general idea of what we're talking about here. Inappropriate behavior that can range from touching all the way up to intercourse that is not solicited. And so that's what we're talking about. These are all, the next few slides are going to be all different kinds of activity that fall within this policy. For the next slide, we're going to see the definition of domestic violence. That's also something that falls within this policy. So if you have a situation where it's a domestic situation, two married students or two students in a relationship, that comes up a lot, where just relationships just go wrong. And that is something that falls within the scope of this policy as long as all those other things are hit. So next slide. Dating violence. This one you see a lot too. You have a date that does not end the way that you hoped that it would, that there is violence, there is action against someone that they don't want, so that again is going to fall within this. The next slide. This I feel like I see almost more than anything else, especially now with cyber stalking. You get individuals that will text people constantly. I know that there have been instances on this campus with that. They're getting constant texts. They don't want them. They're not necessarily jumping out of the bushes at them. That's not the kind of stalking that we really see anymore. It's mostly electronic. It's very insidious, and it really, it's everywhere. And I feel like that is something that I get a call from a college or university probably twice a month about, is someone dealing with a stalking situation. And that falls within Title IX because it's a form of sexual harassment. So next slide. So this is the hardest part of dealing with Title IX issues, is consent. This is where it all breaks down, typically. You very rarely, again, have a situation where someone is jumping out of the bushes, grabbing someone, and sexually assaulting them. It's always, most of the time, people who know each other, people who kind of like each other. But things go south, and there's miscommunication between the parties on what people want. So this is just the hardest decision that university officials have to make, is whether or not consent was given. It's even harder now with texting and social media because people give the wrong impression in that type of environment, and then it translates into these personal situations where consent is really an issue. So keep in mind, for consent, there are a few things that are important to know. Consent can be rescinded. This is a frequent problem. You'll have a couple, they are hanging out, let's say they're, in a car in the parking lot, for example, and they start interacting with each other, for lack of a better description, and the guy wants it to go further than the girl does. And so she says, no, I don't want to do that. And he's like, okay, he's a good guy, and he says, okay, I don't want to, that's fine. So then they keep making out, and then 20 minutes later, he tries again, and she's like, no, I don't want, no. And so then you go a little farther, and she finally just doesn't say no. And that happens a lot. So the question is, was that sexual assault? Did she give consent? She didn't, and then she didn't say anything. So can her silence be interpreted as consent? It's really hard to say, because what signals was she giving off? That's why these are so complicated. They're never easy. As I've told Dr. Chambers and Dr. Lyon, they're always messy. They are never clean. And so another factor that you can have is someone can say yes, and then they kind of get closer to the act, and then they say, no, I don't want to do that. And if they say, no, I don't want to do that, then consent has been revoked. and then that becomes a Title IX issue. So it's really, I feel bad for our students today because it's a very complicated world that they live in. They have so many different pieces of information coming at them. They have everything that they see on social media, that they see on TV, and this decision that they make in a split second can change both of their lives. And it's really hard, but it's something that we have to keep in mind. And then, of course, you throw in the other part of consent that can be a major issue with college students, and you go to the next slide, and that's alcohol. And if a student is intoxicated to the point that they're impaired, and then they cannot give consent. And we're not talking about like they've had a beer or two. We're talking about if they do not have the wherewithal to make that decision. I think I would say that 99.999% of the sexual assault cases from colleges and universities that I see involve alcohol. Somebody's drinking. They never admit to drinking as much as they probably were, but for both of them, let's say if the individual who wants to have sex can't make that decision, can't ascertain things because they've had too much to drink, or the individual, whether it's the guy or the girl, who wants to initiate it, they can't decide either. Their judgment is impaired. And so that is a situation where consent can't be given. And that is really hard. Again, it's a case-by-case basis type situation. It is not something that I can stand up here and say, if this happens and this happens and this happens, then it's yes. If this happens and this happens, then it's no. Let's go to the next slide. Speaking of throwing out things, here's a hypothetical. So for this one, the student reports that after drinking at a bar, so they're off campus, she returned to her residence hall, now she's back on campus, and she went to a party in another student's room. She reports that she was having trouble walking by the end of the night, and that the male student whose room the party was in said, "Oh, you can sleep over." And so she reports that the next morning she woke up with no clothes on, in his bed, and she's pretty sure that intercourse took place. Now, on the flip side, the male student reports that the female student came to his room, took her clothes off, and climbed in bed with him. He reports that he knew she had been drinking earlier that night, but she didn't seem like she'd had that much. She didn't seem that intoxicated. So this hypothetical is actually basically taken from a case that I dealt with at another school. It's almost exactly this. You take a look at all the issues that are in place here, and there's a lot to unpack. How drunk was she? Did she knowingly give consent? Did she say yes? Remember, if she's just silent, then that's not necessarily a consent. How much did she have to drink? If she was having trouble walking, then that sounds like a lot to me. Maybe she's just a big lightweight, but that sounds like a lot. And it doesn't matter because that's how it impacts her. And so if he could see that she was impaired to the point that she couldn't really decide, then that is going to be a consent issue. So if you're taking off your clothes, does that mean you consent or does it not? Like if you take off, you just take off your clothes, and what do you think? So again, these are the issues that pop up, and the answer is not always clear. So for me, if you're taking off your clothes, then it could be consent, but it might not be. So you have to look at the totality of the circumstances, talk to other people that were at the party. If they say, oh yeah, she totally couldn't walk and she was getting sick in the bathroom, she was slurring her words, then that's a pretty good indication that she'd had a lot to drink and she could not consent. Again, if the male student says, well, she didn't really say yes, but she also didn't tell me no, then that's helpful for knowing whether there was consent as well. So it's also important when you think about these issues of consent, and this is another reason why we wanted to talk to you about this today, for your students. Make sure they're educated about this. Don't just send them to the policy, but talk to them about it and say that these are the things that they need to keep in the back of their mind so that they can make informed decisions. And again, these very challenging situations. So next slide. And then we can move on to the next one. So what happens if you hear about an incident of sexual harassment? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is either report it to the Title IX coordinator or encourage the student to do so. You don't have to do this, but just help them. That's what we want you to do, is help them. So the Title IX coordinator, of course, Dr. Lyon. So you can go and have the student or help the student report it to him. But let's say Dr. Lyon's out of town. Or let's say that they feel more comfortable talking to someone else. There are a variety of other individuals that are identified in the policy that they can report it to. I'm not going to list off all of those, but just to give you some examples, Dr. Chambers is one of them, Bryce Chapman is another one, I believe Dr. Bishop is one, and the athletic director is one. And so you can report it to any of them. I know Tom would be happy to hear from There's a long list, and if you can find, those are the designated responsible parties. And so the goal is to get that report to someone who has been trained to know what to do with it next. And so if you don't know, then look on the policy page, find those people, find the one that you feel the most comfortable working with, and take that student to them or make the report yourself. So let's go to the next slide, and then the next one. So confidential reporting is something that's a little bit different. If you are reporting to one of those responsible parties, so let's say you're reporting to Dr. Chambers, then he has to go to the Title IX coordinator and relay that information. But there are other avenues for students to make these reports that requirement is not in place. And so these are typically like healthcare provider type situations or counselors. So if you've got student counseling services, or you have the athletic trainers for athletes because they're considered in this venue to be a healthcare provider, or if you have student health people, they do not have to report it to the Title IX coordinator. Everyone else does. Now, that doesn't mean that anything it has to go anywhere from there, but otherwise, if it's not a confidential resource, then it has to go to the Title IX coordinator so that Dr. Lyon can get the lay of the land and move on from there. So, next slide. And let's see, we just talked about this. Another way that students can report it is they can go to public safety, or they can go to local law enforcement. And that's a bigger step when you're going to local law enforcement, but if you have a student who wants to do that, then please help them find where they need to go. Please help them through that process, be an advocate for them, and that's gonna make the best of a bad situation. So public safety also has an anonymous crime tip line, so they can report it through that if they want to keep it confidential. So next slide. And then again, just because it's reported here on campus, it doesn't mean that it has to be reported to local law enforcement. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't always have to be, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Then the next slide. So, whoops, let me back up. Now, one thing and when we were drafting the policy, this was something that we had some discussions about, right, Dr. Lyon? So, limited amnesty, and we've designated it as limited amnesty. As I said, a lot of these incidents, really all of them for students, involve alcohol or some other illicit behavior. It's, drugs, alcohol, all that type of thing. And so the concern is that you're going to have students who don't want to report because they don't want to get in trouble. Whether it's their friend, their roommate, let's say, who was sexually assaulted, and they were all drinking together, and so you want to support your roommate, but you don't want to get in trouble yourself. Or let's say you know that you were drinking, and you think you got sexually assaulted. Well, you don't want to report it because you're afraid you're going to get in trouble for other things, because you know that you're underage and that you shouldn't have been drinking. So what this puts in place is limited amnesty. And basically what it means is if you're a bystander or you're a complainant or a victim and you report sexual assault, It is not going to subject you to disciplinary action for that other bad action that you had participated in, but only in relation to this particular incident. Now, what it might mean, that doesn't mean you're going to get off the hook completely, but we are not going to put punitive measures in place, but what we can put in place are supportive measures, educational measures. So let's say somebody gets really drunk, gets sexually assaulted, and reports it. They're not going to get in trouble for drinking, but my guess is that they're probably going to have to attend like an alcohol awareness educational program or something like that. There might be things put in place where you want to keep an eye on them because you don't want this to happen again, because frequently it does. Like it's a pattern. And so that is put in place so that students are still willing to come forward. Because again, at the end of the day, the most important thing is to keep the students safe. And the second most important thing is to keep the university out of trouble. So this is in place only because of that, because we don't want students to hide things because they're worried about what might happen to them. So next slide. So you go to the Title IX coordinator, what happens next? So Dr. Lyon is going to sit down with the student and they're going to talk about what the process looks like. They're going to talk about supportive measures. He's going to give them a copy of the policy. He's going to explain the process for filing a formal complaint, and then he's going to discuss the options that are available and give them information about resources. So like counseling resources, and anything like that, rape trauma resources, all of that. The next thing that he's going to talk to them about is supportive measures. Let's go to the next slide. So supportive measures, as I mentioned earlier, the specificity of this is new in the new regulations. They're very detailed on what they're looking for. And again, these are the things that we're going to be doing for both the complainant and the respondent. And it doesn't matter whether there's a formal complaint or not. So these are things that are going to be put in place immediately when Dr. Lyon or whoever the Title IX coordinator is at the time gets that report. And so these look like no contact orders. We use those a lot, which means don't go near each other, don't text each other, don't call each other, don't send messages through friends, don't write notes on boards, do not come anywhere near each other. We use those a lot. We also use things and actually, let's go to the next slide. We change housing locations. We might move one of them, if they're in the same residence hall, we might move one of them out. Or if they want a campus escort because they feel unsafe, they're afraid that the perpetrator is going to stalk them, and so they feel unsafe, and so we give them an escort around campus. We also have changed class schedules. Sometimes they're in the same class, so we will move one of them out. All these are the type things that you put in place. We might give a leave of absence if it's an employee type situation. Really, anything that you can put in place that's not punitive. It is something that's there to support both students and keep additional incidents from happening. So let's go to the next one. As a last resort, if you have a situation where somebody is really, this is a real threat, and this does happen from time to time, we can do an immediate removal, an emergency removal of the student. So this comes into play when you've got incidents involving multiple students. So let's say three students come and say, this person sexually assaulted me. That looks like a serial type situation, and so they definitely, that's something you might look at an emergency removal. Or if it's violent, like if there's been violence involved, like serious violence, or an imminent threat. If they're threatening them, if they're stalking them and they won't leave them alone, and it's escalating, then you can look at an emergency removal. Another reason you can look at an emergency removal is if there's been a violation of those no contact orders. So you put the supportive measures in place, you have a no contact order, and they still keep contacting them. Then that's a situation where, you know what, you gotta go. And so they get an emergency suspension and removal from campus pending the outcome of the proceedings. So that is something that's kind of a last resort. And the next slide we'll talk about, basically the employee version of that is administrative leave. So it's kind of like putting a student on administrative leave when you do an emergency removal, and we can do the same thing for employees. So we can move ahead, and now we're going to talk about formal complaints on the next slide. And as I said earlier, this is really what gets the ball rolling. This is when you come in and you say, I want to file a formal complaint, I want to start this process, I want this to be official, here it is in writing, I'm going to sign my name, and again, you have to look at whether this activity fits within the policy. Is it a student accessing or attempting to access a university program or activity at the time that the formal complaint is submitted, or an employee, same thing? Those are what you want to look at. Next slide. So again, what if the complainant doesn't want to file a formal complaint? But what if it's a really bad situation and we're pretty worried about it? The university can file a formal complaint on behalf of the university. Title IX coordinator can instigate it. The problem you run into with this is if you have a student who's the complainant who does not want to participate, you can't make them participate. And so it is challenging at best because you may or may not have a situation where you don't really have a witness. So that makes it kind of difficult. But there are instances where it is important enough and you can gather enough information that you can make it work even without the participation of that complainant. But it is tough. And we do try to consider the complainant's wishes when we're looking at whether or not a formal complaint should move forward. If they really, we're not going to push somebody to do it. Definitely not. We might encourage them. We might talk about how it can benefit the rest of the university community. But again, and we talked about this before with the chilling effect of these new regulations, it's difficult to put somebody in this position because you're basically saying, if you file this formal complaint, then you get to have a little trial. And that's really hard to sell to people. And I will say that I have not seen nearly as many of these matters go to hearing since these regulations have been put in place. They kind of go away. Sometimes we can do informal measures to resolve them, which in some instances, in many instances, is great. But I do worry that there are instances of sexual assault that are never seeing the light of day because students are afraid of that hearing. So, next slide. So let's see when you've got a situation where you have several complaints that are filed. Like I mentioned earlier, there were several people who said this guy or this girl sexually assaulted me. The Title IX coordinator can coordinate and they can add them together. It's like a class action. They can make them into one discrete hearing. We don't usually do that, but sometimes we can. And so that's something to think about. Or if you have multiple allegations by the same respondent, that definitely usually goes into one hearing. But again, we're just not seeing that many of these. So next slide. This is something I mentioned earlier, more detail on this. Mandatory dismissal of some of these formal complaints. This is when you're looking at whether it falls within the Title IX policy or not. As we mentioned, there are lots of things that are in place that you have to check off in order to fall within that policy. That's another reason why we're not seeing as many of these hearings, because a lot of stuff doesn't fit, which is kind of unfortunate because the whole point is to help students and help employees and help the university guide them through this process, but if nothing fits, then it doesn't actually really help at all. So mandatory dismissal is going to come up if the conduct doesn't constitute sexual harassment under that very specific definition, or if it didn't occur with connection to a university education program or activity, or if it didn't happen in the United States. If any of those three things are met, then it's a mandatory dismissal, and it has to be kicked out to another policy. Next slide. We also, at our discretion, can dismiss some of these. This comes up when, let's say, the complainant withdraws the formal complaint. You don't have to dismiss it then, but you can. Again, the university can proceed without the complainant's participation, but we don't usually see that. So usually that's the type thing where that's going to be dismissed. The second one, if the respondent is no longer enrolled or employed by the university. That actually happens a lot. Kids get into these issues, they kind of freak out and they transfer, or they unfortunately drop out, and that happens frequently. So again, you can continue with that process if you want to, but you don't have to. The next one is when there's just, the evidence isn't there. Like if you're just, this is not going to work, we can't get enough evidence, and gathering the evidence appropriately is not going to be possible. That's another instance where you can have a discretionary dismissal. So the next slide talks about how you dismiss these. So remember that all the other policies are still in play. So even if it doesn't fit under this one, then you can still proceed under another policy. So the Title IX coordinator is going to notify everybody in writing. That's a big thing. Lawyers love everything to be in writing. So they're going to notify everybody in writing. They're going to let them know that they can appeal the dismissal, and they are going to take a look at the formal complaint and continue to monitor it, because sometimes things come up after the fact, and then we can put that formal complaint back in place again. And then the final step is to look and see if it falls under another policy, and 9 times out of 10, it does. So our next slide has a hypothetical. So a former student files a formal complaint alleging that he was sexually harassed by an adjunct professor when he was a student 5 years ago. So what are we going to look at here? So is the former student attempting to engage in a university program? Like what is their interaction with the university at this point? Is the adjunct even still teaching there? If the adjunct's not here, then that's not going to fit. Does the conduct meet the standard for Title IX sexual harassment? So these are the type of questions that we're going to look at when something like this comes up. And the answer may be yes, the answer may be no. It all depends on what the situation is. So the next slide, and then we're going to talk about how you will serve the university and the way in which you need to do it, which is impartially. So the next slide, we talk about conflicts of interest. So let's say you have a student who is in your class. Then you know the student. That can make it more difficult for you to be an impartial decision maker if you were put in that role, for example. Or if it is an RA who also has that student on their floor, you can still guide them through the process, but there's certain roles that we don't want you to fill. And so it's very important along the way, if you kind of think that somebody else might have a conflict of interest, it's important to raise that, because anytime you have a potential conflict of interest, it detracts from the validity of the final result. And so we want it to be, everyone to be impartial, everyone to come in with just a clean perspective, and that's the goal for that. So next slide. And again, as far as, even aside from conflict of interest, it's important as you go through it to keep an open mind. It's really easy, once you hear like little bits and pieces of it, to come to a conclusion. And I have to caution myself against that too. It's very, very difficult, but you have to put on blinders, listen to the information, and wait until everything has come out before a decision is made or before you kind of come to a conclusion. So that's very, very important for the decision makers who are involved in this to only come to that conclusion at the end of the process. So next slide. You also, like I said, you want to keep in mind interactions that may give a rise to the appearance of a conflict of interest. You want to make sure that you don't have interactions with the students. If you are a decision maker, that's going to be a problem. And you also want to know that you are not, the university, this is super important, the university does not expect for you, if you are on a hearing panel, for instance, making one of these decisions, they do not expect for you to come to a certain conclusion. The conclusion that they want you to come to is the one that is supported by the evidence. That's it. I know it can be hard if you are an employee and you are tasked with this particular job to think that, well, if I say that, that this employee did this to this student, is that going to say that am I faulting the university? Is this going to get me in trouble? And the answer is no, because the university wants the right answer. They don't want an answer that you think they want. They want it to be supported by the evidence, because again, that's how we keep the students and employees safe, and that's how we protect the university. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. Then now we're going to talk about the grievance process and procedures. And these have been very laid out in great detail in these regulations. I'm not going to really dwell on these because really you won't really, most of you won't see this. This is mostly Dr. Lyon. But I just want you to be aware of what the process looks like, because I feel like sometimes students come and ask questions and you don't know what to tell them. And so just so you can kind of have a high-level view of what that looks like. So the standard for cases in these circumstances is preponderance of the evidence. And so that means that, first of all, a student is not presumed to be in violation of the policy until the decision maker determines that they are. So basically, it's kind of the functional equivalent of innocent until proven guilty. So we go into it thinking the student we do not believe they're responsible. It has to be proven. And the way that it has to be proven is by preponderance of the evidence. That is a lower level of standard than you find in a criminal trial. It basically means that it's more likely than not that this happened. And that's the standard that is in place across the board for this. And that is the whole process. We try to have it done within 90 days. Sometimes that is just aspirational, but sometimes they move really quickly. Sometimes they're really complicated. And those are all the things that we try to keep in place as we go through this process with the student. So the next slide. So we're going to get the notice of complaint to the student, and both the students or the employees, everybody's going to be notified, again, in writing. And it also will include details of what the accusation is, what policies are violated, because we want to lay it all out for the students so that they know what is coming their way. It also has to let them know that they have the right to an advisor of their choice during the grievance process, and that they can look at the evidence and they can that's gathered through the investigation, and that they will get the opportunity to review the report that the investigator prepares. Next slide. And then again, if there are going to be additional allegations that are going to be investigated that were not in the original notice, then we have to send a supplement. And then also, parties get notice of everything. And so that's a big job for Dr. Lyon. He has to constantly send these notices. There's restrictions on how many days. And so it's a process that you try to keep moving along, because obviously you want to have it resolved for these students as soon as possible. So next slide. So advisors, this is an area where any of you in this room could be drawn into this process. A student has the right to select an advisor of their choice, and the advisor is going to serve two roles. They're going to support them in the process. That's really the most important role. They're going to support them. They are going to be there with them at the hearing. And they also will can cross-examine the witnesses during the hearing. And this has been put in place so you don't have students cross-examining other students. And so the advisor is the person who fills that role. The advisor can be a parent, it can be a staff member, it can be a faculty member, it can be a friend, it can be a lawyer. But the one thing that they all have in common is that, except for those two things, providing quiet support for the student and doing those cross-examinations, they are the equivalent of what we like to call in the legal profession a potted plant. They cannot advocate on behalf of the student. So if you have a lawyer come in, if the student brings the lawyer, and obviously the universities, if they're having a lawyer there, the university is going to have their lawyer there. The lawyer, they cannot advocate on behalf of that student. They can't argue for them. Again, they can advise them on the side, they can support them, but they cannot advocate for them. And the same thing goes for a faculty member or a parent. And that is so hard for advisors to get in their heads. It's very difficult because they want to plead the case for the student, and that's not their role. Again, they are support people, and then they do the cross-examination of the witnesses during the hearing. And that's it. That's all they can do. Along the lines of advisors behaving badly, the university has put into place, we call them the rules of procedure and decorum. And this is for everybody, but it also applies to advisors. And this is because we've had advisors that get a little out of hand, and not anybody in this room. but, or at least I hope not. So we have these advisors that, again, they want to do more than they're really allowed to do. And so we have put these in place for all the parties to give them guidance on how they're supposed to interact with each other. And these rules of procedure and decorum are great for that, because basically what it says, if you have an advisor who does not play well with others, then we can kick them out, and we can decide whether or not they can come back. So if you're an advisor, please play by the rules and support your student and do what is asked of you, and don't step out of those lines, because we don't want to have to kick you out of the hearing. So the next slide. And also, just to mention this, another thing that advisors do is they can attend meetings with the student and the investigator. And again, a lot of times they'll use their mom or dad. And that presents its own set of problems, because the emotional connection there is very difficult. If they don't have an advisor, then the university will provide them one, which again could be you. So lucky you, that could be your lucky day. But just what you wanted to do, right? That's why you're here today, because again, you never know when this is going to come for you. And again, the only purpose really is to provide support for that student. So the next slide. And then one more. So now we're going to talk about investigations, and I actually do a lot of these. The investigation can be done by someone within the university. So sometimes I know Missouri Baptist will ask their public safety officers to do those investigations, because they clearly have a background in that, which is great. Sometimes universities will find that they need to look outside the university to have an investigation done, because they need a fresh set of eyes. They need somebody who has no prior notions of anything, and no one who has any connections to anyone. And so a lot of times they will reach out to an attorney, and so I've done a lot of these. And the way that this works is you come in, you are presented with the general information, the investigator talks to everyone. They can ask to talk to anybody. I've talked to as many as, I had one investigation where I talked to 30 people for the investigation. And that was in the middle of the COVID shutdown, and so we had to do it way across rooms wearing masks. It was a whole thing. And so they can be very, very elaborate, or it can be like 3 people. It can be really small. But the key is to get all the information out, have all the potential witnesses, talk to everybody. Then in the next slide, the investigator is going to put all of that together into a report and provide it to the university. But the key is the report is not the decision. The report is just the background. I like to think of it as like the framework. It's kind of like the preface to the book. And so you have the report in place, but that, if you're on a hearing panel, that should not be your guiding star. You get to make the decision. The investigator only provides the information. And so I want you to keep that in mind. If you get handed an investigation, just know that you don't have to say, oh, well, the investigator said that this happened, so I think it must have happened. Wait until you hear the testimony from the witnesses and from the students and employees, and then make the decision on your own. And that comes back to the whole serving impartially component. So, next slide. So the hearings. And as I've mentioned, this was just a huge change, just an alarming change for me. A little story about myself. So I am not originally from St. Louis. I grew up in North Carolina, and I went to UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad. And I was an aspiring little lawyer, and so they have, for these purposes, they have an honor court at Carolina. It's been around forever, and students, staff, this honor court. Students are the attorneys general, and students are the judges. And so they would send their sexual assault cases, and again, this was best practice at the time. It was a long time ago, unfortunately. But they would send their sexual assault cases to these student honor court panels. If you want to talk about a mess, it was. And I sat on a lot of them. And so we've come a long way from that, because that's not best practice anymore. Some universities will use an individual decision maker, so it's just one person. Some universities will use a panel and then have like a hearing officer that kind of runs the show. Usually, it's faculty and staff members. Sometimes they will include like one student, just to get that perspective. But we've come a long way from when you had students sitting in on these cases, which I still can't believe that we did. But again, that was the way it was done then. And so again, it's way better than it was. However, it is concerning to me, as I have mentioned before, that this is the way that we're handling these now, because I think it has a chilling effect on people who might want to proceed with this, because nobody wants to be cross-examined in a hearing by the advisor of someone who has either accused them of something terrible or someone who has perpetrated something terrible upon them. And so it's very fraught, and I have concerns about how this will work going forward. And I think that basically what's going to happen is we're just not going to see a lot of them because people won't take it to that point, and that presents a whole nother set of problems. So next slide. So again, we talked about the hearing decision maker can't defer to the investigative report. You got to make your own decision. And the investigators, the complainants, and the respondents all have the right to call people to testify at the hearing. The decision makers can ask questions themselves. So everybody can ask questions, and the advisor can only cross-examine. Those are the only questions they can answer or can ask. So that it can take a long time. These are a whole big show. And we'll talk about on the next slide. They have to be recorded. The decision maker will use the preponderance of the evidence standard, and again, they will draft a written determination after that is over, which will be provided to both of the parties. And next slide. Let's see, I think one more slide. Thank you. So let's say that you have a determination that a student has violated the policy. What comes next? So what comes next are the sanctions and the remedies. The sanctions those are punitive in nature. They can be suspension, expulsion, probation. There's a whole universe of options that are out there. For employees, they're all the standard issue disciplinary actions apply. And it depends on the severity of what's happened as to whether or not you're going to have a suspension or an expulsion, or if it's going to be a more minor sanction. You also can have remedies. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, go back one slide. Sorry. Thank you. You can also have remedies that are put in place for the students that are more supportive in nature. So it's kind of an extension of those supportive measures. So that is something else that can be worked into the hearing officer's decision to resolve the situation. And let's go to the next slide. And now this one's really important. And this always concerns me, that people think if they participate in one of these proceedings that they're going to be retaliated against. Whether it's a student or an employee that have concerns, that is something that I know from being personally involved with the university's development of these policies, that the university takes extremely seriously. If you have students that are retaliating against each other for participating, and you hear about that, you need to let Dr. Lyon know immediately, because that's other than an actual sexual assault, that's pretty much one of the most serious things that you can do that's a violation of the policies here, is to strike out at someone who has put themselves on the line, whether as a witness, as an advisor, as a complainant, or as a respondent. Nobody can be retaliated against. We follow the policy, we stay within those guardrails, and that's how we keep our students safe and we keep the university out of trouble. So I will tell you, if my sales pitch today has just stirred something in you and you think this is what I want to do, then I encourage you to talk to Dr. Lyon if you would like a formal role in this process. So if you're really interested in being an advisor, if you think that sounds like something that you would enjoy to support a student, if this is something close to your heart, reach out to him. If you think that you'd like to be involved in decision making, please reach out to him too, because he can get you trained, and that is much more detailed than just the overview that I've given you today. So now I will ask, does anybody have any questions? Anyone? Bueller? Yes. One advisor per student. Now, I will say if your advisor gets the boot, then you can replace them with another advisor. So you always are entitled to one, but that's it. Yeah, so mom and dad both can't be there, or you can't have the faculty advisor and then also a friend. It's just one. Just one. We're trying to keep the universe of people that are involved in this as limited as possible, but still support the students and employees that are involved. So, yes, ma'am. Yes, it is. It is. Yes, it is. In most instances, again, if it doesn't fall within the very limited scope of this policy, then it's going to get kicked out to a specific employee policy. But yes, it covers everybody. It covers everybody. We see it more with students, fortunately, because they are usually have more antics than the employees. But yes, yes, ma'am.
So when you talk about the limited scope of this policy, is everything kind of being filtered by Title IX?
Yes.
Is Title IX like a hierarchy in a hierarchy?
Yes, perfect. We look at Title IX first, and then it's kind of like a flow chart. So we look at that first, and if it doesn't fit within that, then it gets shifted off to another path, and it goes down that road. So, and both the policies are on the university's website. And again, if you have questions after this, I can give my email. You're welcome to email me. And again, Dr. Lyon is a great resource too. So if you can't get a hold of me. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. It's basically the same policy, but when you talk about supportive measures, let's say you have someone who has authority over someone else, then that could be the type of situation where maybe like you remove a student from that situation so that they aren't put in remove them from a class, for example, so that they aren't part of that power differential. So that's not an issue. And again, with retaliation, that's another circumstance where that comes into play because frequently, if it's not student on student, it's usually more straight and narrow, but if it's an employee and a student, then sometimes that differential can be there. So, yes?
If a student immediately reports to legal authorities, if they call the police rather than going through this, what is the university's responsibility under Title IX in that situation?
So if the university becomes aware of it, then their responsibilities do attach. So, and a lot of times if they report it to law enforcement's going to tell public safety, and so we find out about it. And again, the goal is we want to reach out to that student and give them the opportunity to pursue it through both avenues. That if it's going through law enforcement, that doesn't mean that we can't do anything with it. We can do both because we have a different set of sanctions and a different set of remedies to give them and different resources. If it's a student in particular, this is typically where they live. This is where they spend their time. And so the ability to put those remedies and those sanctions in place here and supportive measures, most importantly, on campus is a benefit to going through our process. But going down one path does not mean you can't go down the other. So they can go in tandem, basically, which can get a little messy too. And it used to be that sometimes you would hold off on one until the law enforcement action was complete, but it's a case-by-case type situation. So, anyone else? Yes?
So if we have students that are at internships or practicums sanctioned by or required by the
Right.
if something happens at that site, does that fall under the relative?
So that is typically going to be dependent on the details of the specific contract with that particular practicum or clinical. So I actually, years ago, I was in-house at WashU and handled all their student type situations and wrote a lot of those agreements. And those detail who is in control of the students and the employees in that situation. So it depends. It might fall under one of the other policies, but not necessarily under Title IX. So unfortunately, it's kind of a case-by-case type situation, but that's an excellent question. Anyone else? Did I miss anybody? Okay. Thank you so much. I know that's a lot of information to get through, and I look forward to coming back and talking to you in a few minutes after a little break to talk about something that's, I think, is a lot more fun because it's all about what we can do to lift everybody up. And so that, I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. So thank you so much.
All right, let's take 5 minutes and be back here at 11. Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's reconvene. We have one more lap to go, and then we will have lunch. You guys have been a great audience. Appreciate your respect and your participation in this. Thank you. Here is Betsy Mooney for round 2.
And before I start, I was just having a conversation with Dr. Lyon, and he made 2 comments that I really want him to share with you because I think they're important to know. So, Dr. Lyon.
Thank you. If I haven't met you, again, my name is Ben Lyon. I'm the Vice President for Student Development and Dean of Students and Title IX Coordinator. You may have heard of me from such presentations as Betsy Movie at In-Service Day. But 2 things that operationally I always get a lot of questions about. The first thing is when things get reported, I think you heard from Betsy, I think you know from us, we really care about people, so we take those reports seriously and we move through the policy that's in place with that. What can happen is I'll often get a lot of questions from folks because they're saying, is anything happening? This was reported. Well, as you heard, there's a lot of FERPA, privacy, confidentiality within these policies, and so there's a lot of things that are happening in the background, but the university never brings those to the foreground, right? Because again, we're trying to limit the number of individuals involved, limit the information, keep it as a need to know. So again, we're protecting the privacy of those individuals as much as possible. So lots of things are happening, but you may not be aware of it. And folks often have questions about that, right? It was reported, is anything really happening? Yes, lots of things are happening. We just don't push that information out or disclose it unless it's a need to know for an individual. The other thing is, through the Title IX policy, we also cannot put a gag order on an individual. So the other thing that I frequently come across is that if there are students involved, they often like to share their information, and they can choose to disclose their information as long as, again, it's not retaliatory in nature or going against one of our other policies. They may share their story with their friends, with their teammates, with their classmates, with you guys as faculty and staff, share it on social media. So oftentimes too, this relates to my previous comment of somebody will come and say, hey, I heard about a situation or my student disclosed this to me. And I'll take that information in, but I won't necessarily confirm or deny that there is things in place or things moving, but I'll say great, we'll go through the process. I'll make sure that I connect with that student to make sure that we're meeting our obligations as the university. But you may know a lot of things that are happening, but because of FERPA and privacy, the university is not gonna disclose those things or necessarily confirm or deny them, right? So those are things that just happen. So thanks.
Again, call him, and then he'll call me. So thank you again for your attention for the last hour or so. We're moving on to a new topic, and I think it's a lot more fun. We're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion here at Missouri Baptist. And we can move into that first slide. And again, we're gonna go back to why are we here? What are we talking about today? What's our purpose? And this statement here appeared in a presentation that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office here had as part of a student meeting that they had with a guest speaker. And I loved it because I think it really encapsulates what the goal is with respect to diversity in this university. It enriches the experience of the students here. It enriches the experience of the faculty and the staff, and it lifts all tides. It definitely, it makes us all better, and it makes the education that our students receive better, and it prepares them for what they are going out into, which is a diverse world. And so I loved this, and I wanted to make sure and highlight it. And then also point out that when we talk about diversity, I think a lot of people think, okay, well, we're talking about black and white issues. It's so much bigger than that. For Missouri Baptist, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about race, all different races, not just black and white, gender, color, national or ethnic origin, age, disability, military service, learning differences, or socioeconomic class. And so it's a wide variety of diversity that we're talking about. It's not just black and white issues. And I think we have to make sure that we keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, as you go through your daily time here on campus, and keep that in place. Now let's go to the next slide. So this was a new one for me, and I love it because the university reached out for me to do this presentation, and they asked that I include aspects of it from a Christian perspective, which of course is perfectly understandable given Missouri Baptist's mission. And that is not something that any university has ever asked me to do before, and so I loved the challenge. And I thought it was interesting to think about these things in those terms. And I love Dr. Chambers' statement when he first introduced me, because it really, when you talk about the law of the land and then the higher law of God, and I really think in this instance, those two things, they travel together, and I loved that. And I like to think about the fact when you think about the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity is diverse. You have three parts that are separate and are different, but are also part of one whole and are the same. And so I think if you think about the Holy Trinity guiding the way when you think about diversity issues, then you really can't go wrong. So I like to keep that in mind as we go forward, and also think about the word I want you to take away. The last presentation, the words I wanted you to take away were called Dr. Lyon. This presentation. This presentation, the word I want you to take away is empathy, because if we can find a way to find empathy for each other and people who may not share our viewpoints, who may not look like us, who may not think like us, then we're all going to end up in a better spot. And again, it's going to be better for the students, and that's what we're all here for. So it definitely. Another thing I want to think about with respect to the Christian aspect of it is when you think about the Bible is, it's stories. It's a series of stories. And through those stories, we can see ourselves. And so I think it's important to think about diversity in terms of people sharing their stories. So their story might look different than your story. They might come from a completely different background, but you can learn from their story and hopefully see yourself in their story. And so I like to think about the whole diversity thought process as storytelling and reaching out to other people and making sure that you understand their story. And that, again, brought me back to the Bible, which I thought was kind of cool. So it is interesting when you think about a university that has a Christian focus, how that, there's some elements of diversity that are going to be at odds with that. And so how does that work? How do you navigate that? And again, it comes back to empathy, to listening to their story, and also knowing that you can respect another viewpoint without adopting it. And so listen to it and show it the respect that it deserves. But again, it doesn't have to be what the university necessarily espouses. And so that is a way that you can definitely fulfill that role, even though you're here at a Christian university, which has a certain mission and certain beliefs in place. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about how you can be inclusive in a classroom. So let's say you're a faculty member. This is kind of a roadmap for what we're going to talk about today. You can make it personal, and I'm going to keep coming back to this. Make it personal. Get to know your students. Let them tell you their stories, and you tell them theirs. Then also include a variety of perspectives. Again, this does not have to be something outside what the university has as part of its mission, but you can still include a variety of thought processes and perspectives in your classroom. You also want to watch for problematic assumptions about people, assumptions about beliefs, assumptions about histories. Keep those to a minimum, and we'll go through some examples of that so you can see how that will work and what the solutions for each of those problematic assumptions would be. Then give some thought for how you group students in learning. Group group work is great. It's wonderful. It gives people an opportunity to interact with each other, but you want to be careful as to how you group students so that you're not doing it in a way that is not inclusive, that makes them feel ill at ease. So also, and probably most importantly, you want to consider your decisions, your comments, and your behaviors while you're teaching, because you are the head of that classroom, and you set the standard and you set the tone for the way that people interact in your classroom. And so it's very important for you to keep that in mind as you're interacting with your students and presenting material to them. So next slide. So let's talk about making it personal. We talk about getting to know your students and their backgrounds. And what are some ways that you can do that? Well, you can share your story. You can talk about, whether it's your faith, whether it's your family, whether it's your background. Include that in your interactions with students, whether it's in a classroom or if it's just as a staff member interacting with a student. Let them get to know you, because if they get to know you and you get to know them, then it changes the whole dynamic. And I think if you know people personally, you're much more likely to forgive transgressions that they might make. If you know them, and as I know, everyone in this room is a good person. Nobody is out to put someone in a bad position or make them feel bad about themselves. And so if you get to know the person, they know you're a good person, then you can have a conversation about any issues that might come up, as opposed to them just immediately jumping to, oh, well, they did this wrong, they must hate me, and they hate the way I look, or they don't understand me, that kind of thing. And you also want to encourage other students in the class or in the group or in the activity to do the same. Let them share their experiences. They have a vast repository of experiences and stories to tell. So let them share them, because that elevates everyone and gives everybody the opportunity to interact with each other, again, on a more personal basis. So let's go to the next slide. So include a variety of perspectives. So if, let's say it's a literature class, maybe don't include only literature from white authors, for example. Maybe you can include some from African American authors, you can have some Native American, you can have some older, some younger, depending on the nature of the course, obviously. If it's restricted in another way just because of the title of the course, then that's a different story. But again, you want to try to give as broad a perspective as you can. That's much more enriching for the students as well, which is great. You also want to be careful about the way that groups are portrayed in course content. That doesn't mean that you can't have course content where a group is portrayed in a negative way, but you want to have a conversation about that. And you want to make sure that it doesn't, the problem that you have in that type of situation, and if you're not providing a variety of perspectives, is that it comes across that you only believe in one, that it automatically elevates one perspective if you're only showing one. And so I think that is keeping students involved, having lots of different options for material that you're going to cover, that alleviates that particular concern, and that's great. And you also, as I said before, you want to avoid just boiling it down to black and white, because there's so much more than that. So perspectives and differing viewpoints can come in all different shapes and sizes. And so if the more that you can keep it broad and but still have it be appropriate for the course, the better off you're going to be. Again, you want to focus on the shared experiences that you have, because I feel like, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we've lost so many shared experiences. The only shared experience that we've had has been sitting at home staring at our family and wishing that we could go do something. And so we've lost those moments like this of being together, of interacting with each other, of seeing each other face to face. And I think we all have, we've lost something from that. And so it's important to build those shared experiences back up, have your students talk to each other and to you about what they have in common, and what they have experienced together, or what they've experienced separately but in the same and different ways. And so it's important to focus on those shared experiences so we can start building those back up, because again, we really have lost a lot of that. So next slide. So watch for problematic assumptions. And this is when I said you don't want to get hung up on labels. That can be a real problem if you have in your head, oh, well, everybody from this particular category is going to behave a certain way. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about some examples of problematic assumptions. So the first one is students from certain backgrounds, so students from either urban or rural backgrounds, or students who speak with an accent, or students who are from a particular racial or ethnic group, are poor writers. Like, oh, well, they're from this part of Missouri. Clearly they can't write. Of course, we all know that's not true, but what is the solution for people who might make that assumption? The best way is to have high expectations for all your students. Don't assume that because somebody is from a particular group that they're not going to achieve at a certain level. Expect it from all of them. And that keeps from singling out students that come from a group that might, by stereotype, not be as good at something. You really, as a lawyer, I really hope people avoid stereotypes, because Lord knows the stereotypes about lawyers are not something that you really want following you around. So I'm very anti-stereotype at my house. My husband's a lawyer too. My poor children. So. It's something to keep in mind. Just all lawyers are not bad. Some lawyers are, but just like some of everything are bad. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about these groups. Everybody comes to things with a different perspective, and everybody's not cut from the same cloth, even lawyers. So some are better than others. So anyway, if you are giving the same expectations for all your students, then it's not putting certain students on the spot, and that is great. Let's go to the next slide. So the next one, students who are affiliated with a particular group are experts on issues related to that group and are comfortable, or feel comfortable being seen as the information source on that particular topic. So that's the functional equivalent of saying, oh, I have a student who has a disability. Well, clearly they must have thoughts on, ADA compliance and whether we should build this new ramp that comes into this building. Well, maybe they don't care, but you don't want to put them on the spot and just assume that they are going to have a particular viewpoint on something. The same way, if you have an African-American student, you don't want to assume that they have a very strong feeling one way or the other about Black Lives Matter. They might, but you should talk to them individually and find out if it's something that they want to talk about, so they're not put on the spot. And it doesn't single them out, because that can make people feel really uncomfortable. And so that's the solution for that particular problem. When you talk about students that are affiliated with a group, you want to get input from all your students. So let's say you're having a conversation, about Black Lives Matter protests, for example. You don't want to just ask the students of color in your class for their opinions. Ask everybody. Let everybody have a conversation about it. And that, again, avoids putting people on the spot. It makes them feel included, and it gives everybody the opportunity to share their story. And again, to include those shared experiences, because you don't want to miss out on commentary that might come from a source that you don't expect. And by the same token, you don't want to ask a student who is in a particular group that you might think might have this particular thought, and put them on the spot if they don't agree with it at all, because then they will feel like they have said something wrong. And so that is important to keep in mind. Just ask everybody the questions. Keep it, discuss it with everybody. Let everybody tell you their story. So next slide. So the next one is all students from a particular group share the same view on an issue, and their perspective will necessarily be different from the majority of the class who are not in that group. So this is really easy to do. You might think, well, everybody who is, just to go back to Black Lives Matter again, everyone who's African American is definitely going to support Black Lives Matter in this class. Well, that's not true. It may be true, but you don't know that until you talk to them individually. Maybe they have very different viewpoints on it. Or by the same token, maybe you have white students in the class who feel very strongly about it. And you're going to want all those viewpoints. And again, and not just black-white issues, but any kind of issues. You want to get the input from everyone and not make assumptions about the students that are in your class. So, next slide. So we talked about grouping students with care. And really, with this, you're going to want to use group work, but use it carefully. So don't always set your groups up the same way. Don't always randomly assign groups, but you can do that some of the time. Some of the time you can create heterogeneous groups. So let's say you have some older students in each group, and some younger students in each group, and some women in each group, and some men in each group. Different races mixed up in the groups. You can do that too. You can also allow students to form their own groups from time to time, but be careful about that because you don't want a situation where you have someone who feels like an outlier, who doesn't feel like they can be part of the group. So when I think about this outside the context of diversity, has anyone seen, I'm a lawyer, so I love this movie. Has anyone seen the movie Legally Blonde? Okay, so when poor Elle, when Elle goes to try to find a study group, and Elle is, for those of you who have not seen the movie, you should definitely check it out. But Elle is played by Reese Witherspoon, and she comes across as like a ditzy blonde who follows her college boyfriend to law school at Harvard. She gets in, she studies, she gets in, and she gets accepted to try to chase him because he found some other girl. So she is definitely a fish out of water in this environment, and she gets there on the first day of law school, and everyone at Harvard, of course, she's in her little Southern California outfit with her little dog, and everyone else is there in their, their berets and their beanies with their coffee and, very serious. And so she goes looking for a study group, which in law school is a big deal. You need to have an outline group because you go through and you lay out every aspect of the notes from the professor, and that's what you use to study for your exams. And she goes to find an outline group, and this is one of those situations where the students kind of self-select. And she goes up to this group, and she's got muffins and everything. I mean, she brought snacks. And they reject her because they're like, you're not smart enough. We don't want you to be part of this group. It also doesn't help her that the boyfriend's new fiance is part of that group and she doesn't want her in there either. So I think about that when I think about people trying to self-select groups. You have to keep an eye out for situations like that so you don't have somebody like poor Elle who's left all alone in a corner with her muffins. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about doing groups that self-select. But it's fine to do it from time to time. Just don't do it all the time because that can be a problem. So next slide. So consider your comments and behaviors. And this is where we come back to the empathy component again. At the outset of a class, it's helpful. We talk about the stereotypes again. Remember, don't stereotype lawyers. We're not all bad. You're going to want to take into account cultural events of students. So don't assign a test on a day that you know that you're going to have students absent. And the way to deal with that is maybe ask them at the outset of the class, say, hey, is anybody going to have, not grandmama's birthday or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. But if they have they have to be out of school. Let's say you have, for example, a Jewish student who happens to be here at Missouri Baptist. And they have days of the year that they are high holy days and they're not here. You don't have to work around them, but it sure would be nice if you gave them some grace and helped them so that they don't feel isolated and in a bad spot. So that's just an example of that. You also want to listen if a student comes to you and says, you know, I have a real problem with this course material in this particular instance. You know, it has this aspect to it that I feel like really portrays my group in an incorrect light. And I'm not talking about bad, because definitely you're going to have material from courses, whether it's just history or whether it's literature or anything, that groups do bad things in life and in history. And so those things are going to come up. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if they believe that they're portrayed inaccurately. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to have a discussion with that student. Ask if they have some alternative material that maybe they could suggest. And if you don't want to go that route, then at least have a discussion in the class so it's not put forth as this is the way, to quote The Mandalorian. No. See, I've got Legally Blonde and Star Wars all in one presentation. What more can you ask for, right? So you don't want them to think that that's the only way. And so I highly recommend that you have those conversations with your students. And again, it all comes back to empathy, listening to their story, and thinking about those shared experiences. So let's see, let's go to the next one. Hold on. So microaggressions are something that I really want to focus on today. I would say when you think about colleges and universities and the racial issues that happen on colleges and universities, or just any kind of discrimination, most of the time it's not big showy things. It's not swastikas painted on dorms. It's not anything like that. It's little things. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. And so it's things that bother students of color or disabled students or women, just to give some examples, that are just little things that kind of get under their skin. And so it's not, they're not big and showy, they're small. So let's look at the next slide. So a little story about this one. And another story about me. After I went to the University of North Carolina, then I went to the University of Virginia for law school. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh, UVA, we're gonna talk about the torches on the lawn. We're not, because that wasn't students in particular, and it wasn't sanctioned by the university, and it broke my heart because I got engaged on the lawn, and so that was really hard to see. But that's not what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about that hallway that's in that picture, or that hallway that's in that picture. So UVA is a beautiful campus, designed by Thomas Jefferson. It looks like something out of a magazine. It is gorgeous. The law school, when I first went there, outstanding law school. Wonderful place to go to law school, but it was ugly. It was so ugly. This building, I mean, it was boring, it was brick, terrible. So when I was a first year, they started this major project to redo the law school. And they built out the law school that was already there, they added on another building, and they built a connector hallway in between. And this is that hallway. And you're looking at it and you're thinking, what's wrong with the hallway? Well, along that hallway, they hung these paintings, beautiful paintings, of all the former deans of the law school. All in a row, like beautiful, big paintings. Well, the reaction that they got from their students of color was immediate, and they were heartbroken because every dean of the law school up to that point had been a white male. And so that hallway became named, and still to this day is called Dead White Guy Hallway at UVA Law School. And again, this was not something that was intentional. They weren't trying to hurt anybody. They just didn't think about it. And I will also say that many of the men in those pictures, they weren't actually dead at that point. So they probably were a little like, wait a minute, I'm still here. Some of them were still teaching at the school at the time. And they're like, but So there's dead white guy hallway. What are they going to do about this? This is an example of a microaggression. It wasn't intended to be a bad thing, but it really hurt a lot of people. And so how do you fix this? Well, the number one way you fix this is that you, at some point, you appoint a dean who brings some diversity to that hallway, which I am happy to say they have. And she's wonderful. But at the time, how do you handle that? You know, you're not going to rip down the portraits because that doesn't look good either. And so what they ended up doing was, it was kind of putting lipstick on a pig to a degree, but there was an alcove in this, a fairly prominent alcove in this hallway where, and they didn't have any deans that they could highlight that were people of color or women, so they had to go to their students and their faculty. And so they highlighted prominent students and faculty that had gone through the law school in those two areas. And so now they are celebrated in that hallway just in a different way. Again, it's not perfect, but it made a lot of people feel a lot better. So when I think about microaggressions, I try to think about things like this. It's not the torches on the lawn, it's the hallway with the paintings. And so if you're building a law school, don't have a hallway with a bunch of paintings of old dead white guys. So next slide. So microaggressions can fall into 3 different categories. They can be micro insults, which are like behaviors, actions, verbal remarks, that kind of thing. Micro assaults, which are like attacks that are meant to hurt somebody. That's a situation where they are trying to hurt somebody. Or micro invalidations, and that's actions that exclude or negate or nullify the thoughts and feelings of a group that is different from the majority. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about microaggressions. Let's go to the next slide. So this was really interesting. This popped up for me, and I thought it was really interesting. This is a quote from Oprah Winfrey, and I'm not going to read it for you. I'll just let you read it for yourself, and then I'll tell a little story of my own. So I'm a lawyer, and I was a young lawyer in the early 90s, and at that time, I came to St. Louis. I met a St. Louis boy. They never leave. They will always come back home, I have found. And so I came to St. Louis, and I went to work for a big firm. And it's a very intimidating experience as a young female lawyer to walk into a conference room that's full of men. And so when I read this from Oprah Winfrey, I thought, if Oprah feels like this, I mean, this is Oprah. You know, she's amazing and she's so powerful, but if she still has that feeling, and, you know, and I had that feeling, and, you know, I'm in a pretty good spot, but I still had that apprehension, then what must a young student in a college setting feel like if they walk into a classroom and they're the only female, or they're the only person of color, or they're the only member of that group? That automatically is going to put them back on their heels. And so as the faculty and staff, you want to be the one to reach out your hand and compassion and understanding and empathy and bring them in and make them feel a part of the group. And so I like to think about this with Oprah and know that even no matter how confident they seem, you want to make sure that you are reaching out to them and bringing them in. So let's go to the next slide. So why are microaggressions problematic? Why is this an issue? Well, I mean, in addition to the fact that it does not fit the Christian mission of this university, it is a real problem for our students' mental health. They are more likely to have PTSD, it can impair their academic performance, and it can cause elevated anxiety and anger and stress, which again leads them to act out in other ways, which causes disciplinary problems, and then everything just falls apart. And so that's why it's important to keep these in mind as you're interacting with students. Next slide. So here are some just examples of smaller examples than the hallway of microaggressions. So let's say you have a student who wears a head covering, for example, and it's part of their culture, you know, or it's a religious thing, and it's important to them. But you have a no hat policy in your classroom, and you tell them you got to take it off because we don't wear hats. Again, you're just trying to comply with your policy. You're not trying to hurt them, but that makes them feel like other, and that is putting them on the spot. A hat and a head covering for those purposes are really apples and oranges. So if you can find the empathy to think of how that student might feel and know that no one else in the room is going to think that that is the same thing as a baseball hat, then you can make that student feel more a part of things and have them feel comfortable. So that is something to think about there. Another thing is, and I'm guessing there's not a lot of this that goes on, but you do see where people, if you have ethnic hair, people will like reach out and like touch people's hair. And I like to liken this to when I was pregnant with my son, who is now 18, which I can't believe. I was pregnant with him, and I could not believe the strangers that would come up to me and like touch my stomach. It was really weird and extremely awkward, but it happened more than you would imagine. And it's such an invasion of personal space, an invasion of just your bodily autonomy, and this is the same thing. So just that, most of this today, I'm gonna say, it's not gonna be don't do this, but in this situation, don't do that. Please don't do that. And if you see other students doing it, maybe pull them aside and say, hey, that's not appropriate. That's an example of a microaggression. Inappropriate jokes, if you're telling, kind of off-color jokes that bring race or other diverse, disability into the fray, that's another example of a microaggression in a classroom that we can really avoid. So this is I wish that I had more time, because I would love to have shown you this entire thing, because it's very powerful. But there is a TED Talk that was given by Melody Hobson, who, I don't know if you know who she is, but she's the current chairwoman of Starbucks and the former chairwoman of DreamWorks Entertainment, and she's married to George Lucas, which is kind of interesting. Very successful, brilliant lady, African-American lady. And she gave a TED Talk on racial issues. And she told the story of years ago when she her friend was running for the United States Senate out of Tennessee. And he was also African-American, and he was looking for some national media and reached out to her and said, hey, Melody, can you help me with this? And she said, sure, will do. I have a friend who is in a position of authority at a major media company in New York City. We'll do an editorial board meeting with you and with me, and we'll go to this, and that'll be a great way to kind of kickstart your campaign. So she talks about how they show up that day, and she describes, they were all in their suits, and she said, we were like shiny new pennies. And they go to the receptionist and they say, hey, we're here for the meeting. And she says, great. And she leads them down a hallway and they end up in this room that's very stark. And they're a little bit confused, because this doesn't seem like the type of place that you would have a meeting like this. And then she looks at them and says, where are your uniforms? So she thought they were there to help. They were there to serve for the meeting. She made that assumption based on the color of their skin. Now, this is a very prominent, successful, confident person, and she said, we just kind of had to laugh it off. But that isn't always the person that this is happening to. Did anyone see the movie In the Heights this past summer? In the Heights? So has anybody seen Hamilton? Okay, so In the Heights is written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton. It's a musical, and my daughter is now a Muni teen. She's done the Muni since she was 9 years old, and so we had to go see In the Heights because it was a musical. It was great. I highly recommend it. But there's a storyline in it it tells the story of this community in Washington Heights in New York City, and it's a Latin community up there, and they tell the story of this girl who's like the shining star of this community. She's brilliant, she's smart, she's accomplished, and she goes to Stanford. And she comes back home and is just heartbroken because she's been marginalized while she's at Stanford through a series of microaggressions. And one of them was she went to a reception. She got all dressed up. She went to a reception for students, and again, she's a Latina, and the people at the reception assumed that she was a waitress. And that hit her really hard. And she wanted to drop out of school because she felt so marginalized, even at Stanford. And again, this is a fictional story, but the other one's not. And I know that it happens. And so I don't think that things like that are going to happen here, but just keep those in mind, that is something to consider when you're interacting with people. Don't make assumptions and don't participate in that kind of microaggression. And check out In the Heights because it's really good. So next slide. So this is probably the most important part of what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, last fall, the university brought in a very dynamic speaker whose name is Marcus Goodloe. And he goes around the country talking to groups on diversity issues, and he talked to the students. They were here in this room. And he elicited feedback from them on what their experiences have been at Missouri Baptist. And I thought it was important. It's hard to see this, but I thought it was important for you to know what the student experiences are here. And so I'm going to go through some of these, not all of these. These are students of color, diverse backgrounds that are having these experiences here on campus. They said they feel tokenized. Some of them said that they feel uncomfortable speaking their native language on campus because it makes them too noticeable. This was one, apparently, and I don't know all the details of the situation, but there in a residence hall, there was a group of African American girls who were braiding each other's hair in the lobby, and then a poster went up saying, "Please don't braid hair in the lobby, it's a cleanliness issue." But they only posted it after the African American girls had been doing it, and so they felt like it was singling them out. They say there's a lack of representation in chapel and speakers, that they don't feel is represented, that there's only one Black RA, and so they don't see themselves represented in that the administrators, they aren't representative of all the diversity. And again, that's not something that can change overnight or necessarily needs to, but you have to keep that in mind that this is their experience. They say that they sometimes have problems with public safety, treating them, they feel like they have treated them differently because they come from a diverse background. Again, I don't know the validity of any of these, but I'm just sharing that this is what their anonymous comments were with respect to this presentation. The next slide. They also say when we speak up, when students of color speak up, even if we're advocating on behalf of issues that impact all the students, that why is the perception that we're being dramatic and causing problems? Whenever we speak up, that we're always the drama queens. The next one, there are not many events with other students other than athletics or ABC, which is the Association of Black Collegians, where students of color can gather. There are just not that many opportunities. So do we need to look for ways to increase that? Then there's some that say, I'm not an athlete. And so there are not many spaces for people of color or Black students who don't play a sport. And so I don't know how to connect with other people who are either like me or not like me on campus. I don't know how to do that. Then another one, well, they mentioned that the RA invited every Black student to the ABC meeting. Well, and that's great, but they need to invite the white students too, because that's where the conversations take place. And that's where those stories are shared and that empathy and that bond is built. And so include everyone. Don't just single out, don't just assume that it's only the Black students who want to go to the ABC meetings. And then they feel like they're consistently having the same conversations and that it's the same issue over and over and over again. And so that is another thing that they have expressed as their experience here. Next slide. They want to see more diversity in the administrators and the faculty and the staff, but until then, they want them to understand them. They want more than just talk, they want change. So you need to talk to them about what change do they want to see. They say that they want less behind the scenes work and more in front of the scenes work. So more training and interaction. I think they really, really liked the presentation that he gave. I think it was really popular and I think it was really powerful. And so bringing people like that on campus to talk, I think would go a long way, and giving them opportunities to talk to each other and build those connections. Have conversations with people that you have relationships with. And I thought this was really powerful. I'm not going to be vulnerable with people I don't know. So again, it has to go back to keeping it personal, getting to know your students and that you interact with. Because if you get to know them and you have that relationship with them, then they're going to feel comfortable being vulnerable with you and sharing their stories, and you're going to be less likely to have issues in the classroom and in activities. And then finally, they say, put more focus on the students because they're the foundation. Now, I know that all of you, your focus is the students, but maybe the way we have to think about it needs to shift a little bit. And lastly, I will say I went to has anyone ever gone to the St. Louis Speaker Series through Maryville University? It's fabulous. I highly recommend it. My husband and I went last night, and they bring in a wide variety of speakers. It's been everybody from, they've had John Bolton, they've had various authors. Next time is Theresa May. And last night was a photographer, and his name was Platon. And he has photographed 30 covers for Time magazine. He has photographed Vladimir Putin. He has photographed hundreds of celebrities, and he also now is focused on taking pictures of just everyday people, and he's a human rights activist. It was completely fascinating. He spoke for an hour and a half, and I could have listened to him for 3 more, and his photography was incredible. It just distilled these people down to their essence. I highly recommend Googling his name and looking at some of his work. But he talked about lately that he had taken the photograph of a young girl who was a human rights activist, a young African-American girl, and he has these conversations with his subjects when he photographs them. And he said, what would you want people to know? What can we do? What can we do to get to know each other? And she said 3 things, and I thought they were extremely powerful, and so I'm going to tell them to you now. She said, talk to us, not at us. Listen to us, don't hear us. And stand with us, not in front of us. And I was sitting there, and I thought, oh, I have to share this tomorrow, because I think if you follow those 3 things, then your interactions with everyone on this campus are going to be so much richer. And so I hope you will keep that in mind as you go forward. And I'm going to stop there because I know you've got to move on, but thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back with you, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I would like to read a scripture because it just came to mind throughout what you presented. Paul writes in Philippians 2, and there were 2 lessons, I think, today. The first was call Ben, right? And there's that show, Better Call Saul, so let's just adopt Better Call Ben on campus. And then what was the one word you said undergirded everything that you wanted to say this morning? One word starts with an E? Empathy, yeah. And so this came to mind when you said empathy. Paul writes, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, Being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He is our empathy. He is our model, and he is the one who teaches us how to do this well. All right, I have a couple brief announcements before we go. One, Dr. Tom Smith asked if we could make sure to mention this. The Women's AMC Conference Tournament begins tonight here at 7 o'clock. And then the men's opening round for the AMC tournament begins tomorrow night at 7. Both in the SRC, there's a $5 entrance charge, and we hope that a lot of you can come out and cheer on our men and women. Okay, we're going to go to lunch at this time, and I'm looking for my text from Amber. There it is, Amber Henry. Here's what we're going to do. We will fellowship and eat out there, and then we will have some time, and we need you to be back in here at 1 o'clock. Out in the Great Hall, there will be setup going on as soon as we finish eating, setup for the service projects. But we need to be here at 1 o'clock so that we can receive instructions on the projects that we're going to be participating in. So let me ask a blessing on our food, and then we will be back here at 1. Father, thank you for the good words we've heard today, the encouraging words and the challenging words, God, that call us to a higher standard and a higher place. We ask you, God, to work so greatly and deeply in our lives, Lord, that Missouri Baptist University becomes this place that this region looks to when trying to ask the question, what does empathy look like? And what does it look like to be a place where we treat each other as persons of so much worth, God, that we consider others more important than ourselves? I pray that, God, your Spirit would work in each of our lives as we hear these encouragements to help us, God, to see our student body and to see one another, Lord, the way you see each of us. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.